Chapter 751. What? Ghost hitting the wall. Why didn't you say so earlier? The other exorcist shouted. That person said in a hoarse voice, I just realized it too. Keep your voices down. Take out your yellow talismans and turn 3 times on the spot before moving forward. Ghost hitting the wall was not something difficult to deal with. However, the scary part was that if they could not overcome this obstacle, they would be stuck here forever. Even if they walked for a year, they would not be able to make any progress. Fortunately, they were exorcists and knew how to deal with this kind of situation. Everyone quickly opened their bags and prepared to cast their spells. Only then did they realize that the yellow talismans in their bags were all gone. How did this happen? Where are my yellow talismans? Mine is gone too. Look again. Still nothing. Zhuge Yun raised his head. The tip of his nose was dripping with sweat. The situation was very obvious. Someone had done something to them and took away their yellow talismans. Who is it? Why would he do this? Zhuge Yun slammed the ground. Hellion Vivian was not too surprised. Since this is a competition, there will be many underhanded methods. Young Master Yun, you have to get used to this kind of thing. Me. Zhuge Yun had always been calm and had never thought of harming anyone. Although he knew that the competition was not a simple matter, at least no one would be so despicable as to take away all the talismans in the graveyard. This simply meant that they wanted to take their lives. Hellion Vivian looked around and stood up. She patted the dust off her hands. When we set off, there were 9 of us. Now there are only 8 of us left. That person must have sensed that something was wrong and slipped away in advance. Seems like he was prepared. The exorcists vaguely knew who was the culprit. Other than the Ni family, it was the Lin family. There were only these 2 families who did not want the Zhuge family to win. Usually it was the order of the head of the family who could be so ruthless. If the culprit was the Ni family, then this matter was too terrifying. They trusted Ni Biao so much that they worshipped him as the exorcist they wanted to be the most. Can't be the Ni family. The young exorcist bit his thin lips, unwilling to admit his guess. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and said lightly, It doesn't matter who did it now. That's right. Older exorcists tended to be calmer. Little brother Wei is right. It doesn't matter who did it. The key is how we get out. Without the yellow talismans, they were like exposed pork on the chopping board. If they encountered any problems, they could only be at the mercy of others. In addition, this was not the outside world but the graveyard. No one could predict what they would encounter. The fear of the unknown made everyone feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts. Even their backs were cold. There was no wind in the graveyard, but it gave people the illusion that someone was following behind them. The exorcists did not dare to speak again. After a moment of silence, the oldest exorcist, Xiaoling, seemed to have heard something. With a faint sobbing tone, he suddenly turned around and asked in confusion, Why are you crying? Crying? Hellion Vivian's eyes sharpened. She did not answer. Instead, she waved her long sleeve and the exorcist knife glowed in her palm. She was not sure if Xiaoling had really heard the crying. However, it was better not to speak at this time. Hellion Vivian used to read a book about the supernatural. There was a story in it. The story was about a couple of farmers who returned home late from plowing the fields. The farmer carried his wife who had trouble walking on his back. It was difficult to walk at night. The farmer was already very tired, but his wife was crying on his shoulder. The farmer frowned. Why are you crying all of a sudden? His wife replied strangely, I'm not crying. The farmer knew very well that his wife was not a liar, so he suddenly shivered. If his wife said that she was not crying, then she really was not crying. Then who did he hear the crying sound? The farmer did not dare to continue thinking about it. He could only walk forward quickly. When he returned home and his wife asked, he said, Fortunately, I know what kind of person you are. I also know a little about the rules. I didn't turn around. Otherwise, I'm afraid the 2 of us wouldn't be able to come back. The farmer was right. When walking at night, the most taboo thing to do was to turn around and look. A person only had 3 protective lamps. One was on the left, one was on the right, and one was behind them. Obviously, the lamp behind Xiaoling had gone out. The crying sound became louder and louder. When Xiaoling saw that Hellion Vivian was not speaking, he seemed to have understood something. He did not dare to ask any more questions. Cold sweat slid down his forehead. His face was pale. As soon as he raised his eyes, he saw a black shadow standing not far away. His pupils shrank as he asked, What is that? Hellion Vivian suddenly raised her head and followed his line of sight. She saw a human-like statue standing at the entrance of the cave. It was clearly the same statue that they had seen before. However, what made Xiaoling feel uneasy was that the eyes of the statue seemed to have moved. It was staring at them gloomily. That kind of indifference with a strange smile made him shudder for no reason. No, we have to get out of here. Xiaoling retreated in a panic. It was as if he had encountered a scourge. No matter how others shouted at him, he would only repeat this sentence. However, in the eyes of others, the statue was no different from before. Hellion Vivian looked at Xiaoling's appearance and frowned. She said to Zhuge Yun, Give me the water bottle. Zhuge Yun immediately took the water bottle and handed it over. Hellion Vivian opened the water bottle with her teeth and splashed a wave of cold water on Xiaoling's face. Xiaoling was stunned by the water. Only then did he wake up. There were still water droplets on his face. He looked at Hellion Vivian, who had retracted her hand. He knew that if he did not come back to his senses, he would have run away. If that happened, he would not be able to come back. He immediately cried out, Thank you. Sob, sob, sob. Thank you. It's nothing. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and patted his shoulder. She knew that he was still a young child. It was probably his first time facing such a situation. She pressed down with her fingers. With the power to calm people down, she said, Calm down. Don't panic. If someone calls you, don't just say yes. Xiaoling nodded. At that moment he did not know why, but there was only trust left in his heart. He trusted the person in front of him more than he trusted the Jiang family. He believed that the person in front of him would lead them out of this damned place unscathed. However, the other exorcists did not have much confidence. They pulled their hair irritably and said, How are we going to leave without the Chinese talisman? Chapter 752. This was indeed the key problem that they were currently facing. Everyone knew that they needed yellow talismans to break the key ghost hits the wall. Without yellow talismans they could only be trapped here. However, what had just happened to Yiling had already indicated how dangerous it would be to stay in one place. If they didn't leave now, they would be in trouble. Zhuge Yun's heart was also clear. He anxiously looked at Hellion Vivian and asked, Brother Wei, do you have any ideas? Hearing this, the other exorcists also subconsciously looked at Hellion Vivian. Even they didn't know that they had unknowingly gained an unprecedented trust in Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and said, Let's close our eyes and try walking. Close our eyes and walk? Wouldn't that be more dangerous? The exorcists didn't doubt Hellion Vivian's ability. However, was it really suitable to walk backwards in this situation? Hellion Vivian smiled and said, In the past, when the officials were robbing tombs, there was a rule. When opening the coffin, one had to enter with their face turned away. When entering the tomb and feeling uncertain about the direction, one had to close their eyes. Ghost hits the wall is a ghost that disrupts a person's judgment through the vibration of their brain magnetic waves. That's why they lose their sense of direction. After all, ghosts are otherworldly items. All of you are exorcists and have spiritual energy in your body. If they want to harm people, they have to use a medium to do so. Using the vibration of their brain waves to create illusions is the most effective way to kill people. For example, Yiling. If we walk with our eyes closed as humans, we will lose our sense of judgment. Without our sense of judgment, the ghosts won't be able to do anything. Naturally, we will be able to walk out of this predicament. Yiling was stunned. He never thought that evil ghosts would have so many tricks to harm people. What was the vibration of their brain magnetic waves? He didn't understand at all. He only felt that the person in front of him was very powerful. Brother Wei, you know a lot. Where did you learn all these things? After seeing all this, the exorcists couldn't help but be amazed. They had been exorcising demons for so many years, but they had never heard of brainwaves. But when they thought about it carefully, evil spirits followed the same pattern of harming people. Hellion Vivian touched the bridge of her nose and smiled silently. She couldn't say that she was more interested in this field in the 21st century and read more movies and novels. Then let's go now. Yiling was the first to support Hellion Vivian. As a loyal follower of Hellion Vivian, Zhuge Yun had long admired Hellion Vivian. Don't worry. The graveyard is dangerous after all. Let's make some preparations. There was a hint of a smile in Helian Wei Wei's voice. She looked indolent, as if she would be able to solve any problem in front of her. This is a cemetery. The yin qi is too strong. We need to expand our yang qi. There are 7 of us in total. To prevent us from getting separated, I will tie a red string around everyone's left wrist. As Helian Vivian spoke, she took out a red string that was more than 100 meters long from Zhuge Yun's bag. The red string had been soaked in pure yang dog blood. Since ancient times, pure yang dog blood had been a sacred item to exorcise evil spirits. As long as the head and tail were not cut off, the rest of the people would be able to avoid danger even if they encountered evil spirits. Zhuge Yun naturally knew about this formation. He didn't expect that the other party would be so adaptable and use such a formation here. However, he said, "Brother Wei, did you count the wrong people? There are clearly 8 of us." When Helian Vivian heard this, she turned around and looked at Beligaju. His Highness wasn't a human. He couldn't be counted. This formation could only be used by relying on a human's yang energy. Once His Highness entered, the formation would lose its effect. However, she couldn't reveal Beligaju's identity. She was thinking about how to answer Zhuge Yun, who had a righteous expression on his face. Then she heard Beligaju's clear and noble voice slowly ring in her ears. He spoke very calmly without the slightest hint of disharmony. "We still need one more person to bring up the rear. I'll bring up the rear. You guys go first." Hearing this, not only Zhuge Yun, but even the other exorcists looked at Beligaju with incomparable gratitude. "Brother Ju, you're really too selfless and too kind. You're actually willing to go to this extent for us." Helian Vivian was speechless. Selfless and kind? These 2 words didn't quite fit His Highness. Inexplicably, Helian Vivian thought of the words that His Highness said to the hundreds of officials when they left the capital. She silently withdrew her gaze from His Highness and looked up at the top of the tomb. Only His Highness could buy people's hearts with just a lie. This kind of thing could only be done by His Highness. Father is pretending again. The bigger fetus snorted coldly. This group of humans actually believed him. Selfless and kind? Does Father even have these 2 things? It's more appropriate to say that he's selfish and ruthless. Stupid exorcists. The smaller fetus did not say anything. He only let out a long sigh in his heart. He continued to suck on his thumb and moved it silently. Big Brother had already scolded the people around him in order to slander Father. Sai, who knew how long this situation would last. Neither the exorcists nor Helian Vivian could hear the conversation between the 2 little ones. After everyone heard the solution, they began to tie the red string on their hands and closed their eyes. Zhuge Yun was the first to take a step forward, followed by the others. It was very dark in the cemetery and it was very deep. No one noticed that in the bottomless darkness, a huge black shadow with 8 legs was slowly wriggling. Its pair of demonic red eyes were filled with desire. What a fragrant soul. This smell is simply too wonderful. Oh, a baby that's about to be born. Its flesh must be very tender and delicious. The huge black shadow muttered to itself. Its voice was extremely gloomy as it said to itself, "But that man is indeed a little unfathomable. He actually made a large group of zombies run back. I can't just walk out like this. I must wait until that woman is alone before I slowly disembowel her. Although the waiting process is a little unbearable, it doesn't matter. Soon I will be able to eat very soon. These humans are not united. I just need to wait." That's right. It only needed to wait a little longer and they would have nowhere to go. The competition between humans was much scarier than the competition between demons. Especially in this cemetery, the emergence of evil thoughts would only cause this group of people to die faster. So there was no need to rush. The delicious food was about to be delivered to its mouth. Ha ha ha. The black shadow laughed at itself. Bit by bit, it hid itself in the darkness again. Chapter 753. On the other side of the graveyard, the Ni family's army also encountered the ghost labyrinth. However, they all had Chinese talismans and were experienced exorcists, so they did not have to spend much effort to settle this matter. However, unlike Helian Vivian, they did not discover it earlier. Ni Feng only noticed the abnormality when she was on her 3rd lap. After hearing what she said, the others sighed again. They were all talking about how smart an iPhone was. After hearing this, the smile on Ni Biao's face widened. As long as his daughter was around, these people would always support and trust the Ni family. In that case, whether it was the Saraira or the world, it was destined to belong to him. Just as Ni, who was deep in thought, a figure approached him and said in a low voice, "Master, everything is settled. I've brought their Chinese talismans over. Those people should still be walking around in circles, unable to get out." Well done. Ni Biao's pent-up anger was finally appeased. His eyes were filled with malice. Losing the Chinese talisman in the graveyard meant that they were on the brink of death. Other things aside, they would be at a loss as to what to do with the ghost wall. They could only walk on this path endlessly until they died of exhaustion. They would not be able to reach the end of the path, or they would not know that the things in the graveyard would not wait for them to be tired. They would reach out from the ground and drag them into hell. As soon as he thought of this, Ni Biao could not suppress the smile on his face. One side of his mouth was curled up while the other side was stiff like a corpse. His face was full of strangeness. He could not see his own expression, but the person standing in front of him was shocked. "Master, you just..." When the exorcist shouted, everyone jumped in fright and looked at them. Ni Biao frowned. "Why are you making such a fuss? Hurry up." The exorcists were stunned. Looking at their master, who was no different from before, they could not help but shake their heads. Could it be that they were mistaken? "Father, what's wrong?" An iPhone walked toward Ni Biao. The veil vaguely covered her face, and with the flickering torchlight, no one could see Ni Feng's face clearly. They would only think that she was weak and gentle. Her body was still full of spiritual aura. When she walked past, every exorcist could feel her gentleness. Ni Biao had always been very patient with his beloved daughter. He avoided the topic and said, "Nothing, it's just the people below who don't know the rules and like to make a fuss. Feng, you're not in good health, so don't worry about me. Even if it's for us to reach the main coffin sooner, we have to stop, understand?" Ni Biao's words were not for Ni Feng but for the other exorcists. He wanted them to know that it was all because of his beloved daughter that they were able to get to where they were today. When Ni Feng heard him, she immediately coughed a few times and shook her hand. Her voice was soft and tired. "Cough, father, I'm fine. It's not safe in the cemetery. We should reach the main coffin as soon as possible." "You're too considerate of the world." Ni Biao looked at Ni Feng kindly, his eyes full of sympathy. When Ni Feng spoke, even her breath was a little out of breath. "As the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl, this is what I should do." When the crowd saw this, they naturally worshipped the Ni family even more. Even the suspicion that they had just raised was dispelled. They could only praise Ni Feng for having a bodhisattva's heart. No one noticed that when Ni Feng lowered her head, her thin lips seemed to be moving as if she was chewing something. At that moment, Ni Biao also felt a little tired. The sudden sleepiness made him shake his head. "Master?" The exorcist sent by Ni Biao was still looking at him. Seeing that his eyes were a little dazed, he asked worriedly, "Are you okay?" Ni Biao came back to his senses and was a little more awake. "I'm fine. But why did you shout so loudly just now? Was there something on my face?" The exorcist hesitated for a moment and immediately shook his head. "No, I saw wrongly." He couldn't possibly say that the master looked like he was possessed at that moment. That was completely impossible. The master's exorcism magic was the most powerful in Exorcist City. No ghost could get close to him. The exorcist thought that he must have been hallucinating. After all, it was easy to see wrongly after going around in circles. However, no matter how he comforted himself, there was always a voice in his heart asking himself, was such a realistic scene really an illusion? "We've reached the exit." Looking at the faint light in front, someone shouted. Oldly glanced at him and signaled the man to lower his voice. He then took the lead and walked out of the tunnel-like cave. He raised the torch in his hand and lit up all the oil lamps on the ground. A loud boom was heard. The entire cemetery lit up, and the huge mural came into view in an instant. It was as if they had entered a gorgeous palace. There were gold, silver, and jewels everywhere, decorating the stone walls. It was indescribably majestic. Perhaps it was the human nature to be attracted to wealth. When the exorcists saw so many shiny jewels, they couldn't help but want to move forward. "Don't move." elderly suddenly stopped them and pointed to the top of their heads. Look, what's that? The exorcists followed old Lee's finger and looked up. They wouldn't have known if they didn't look, but when they saw it, their scalps went numb. The things hanging on the ceiling were not decorations but corpses, one after another. The scariest thing was Gwazi and filial son, who came in with them and died at the entrance of the tomb, were also on the ceiling. Everyone's eyes revealed an indescribable fear at that moment. Why were they here? How did they come here? Zombies? But what kind of person would hang themselves on the beam of a house? Moreover, their postures were particularly strange. It was as if they were puppets controlled by something. Their limbs and joints were hanging unnaturally, but they were swaying back and forth on the ceiling. Their eyes were fixed on them and there was a strange smile on their faces. It was as if they would wake up at any moment and pounce on them. The most shocking thing was that all the exorcists were thinking, how did these two people get up there? On the way here they didn't encounter these two people. Even if they were zombies, they should at least see the corpses, right? Their speed was already fast enough. At the very least, they were more agile than the dead corpses. Everyone knew that the corpses that had just died, even if they could stand up and walk, would be very, very slow. Even if they walked, they would be left behind. But the current situation was that these two people had actually walked in front of them. Chapter 754. The mystery had left a terrifying shadow in everyone's heart. The disciples of the Ni family who wanted to run to the jewel were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. They dared not take another step forward. However, they had to pass through this place if they wanted to go deeper into the graveyard. Ni Biao's face darkened. He turned around to look at Ni Feng, wanting to know if she had any ideas. The rest of the exorcists also looked at Ni Feng. After all, the eldest daughter of the Ni family had surprised them when she chose the door last time. They believed that she would have a solution this time as well. Little did they know that the reason why Ni Feng mentioned the south gate option last time was because she had eavesdropped on Helly and Vivian. This time Ni Feng did not have any reference at all. Naturally, she would not be able to figure it out. The longer his gaze lingered on her, the more uncomfortable Ni Feng felt. She had never been so embarrassed before. Something seemed to be leaking out of her eyes, but she suppressed it very well and did not say a word. Seeing this, Ni who quickly jumped out to help his family out of the situation. Don't look at my elder sister like that. She will feel burdened and will not be able to think of anything. Moreover, my elder sister has been thinking of ideas all this while. Her body will not be able to take it. As he spoke, Ni who glanced sideways at Ni Feng. Big sister, are you feeling unwell again? Do you want to rest for a while? Ni Feng knew that using her weak body was the best way to deal with this situation. She pressed her fingers on her forehead and softly hummed in acknowledgement. Ni who immediately ordered someone to let Ni Feng take a seat. He then said to the exorcists, "Let my elder sister rest for a while. This matter seems fishy. My elder sister has to think about it before she knows if there's a way to solve it." Hearing this, the exorcists remembered Ni Feng's hard work and immediately said, "Miss Ni's health is the most important thing. Everything else can be put aside for now." That's right. Your health is the most important thing. Let's all rest here. The exorcists were about to sit down. Just then they saw a person slowly walking out from where they had just walked in. It was Zhuge Yun. His hands were outstretched as if he was moving forward in the dark. There was even a piece of cloth over his eyes. Not only him but even the people behind him were the same. "Brother Yun, what are you doing?" The exorcists were no longer the same as before. Now everyone was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. They were on guard against anything abnormal. When Ni Biao heard the two words "Brother Yun," it was as if he was suddenly electrified. He quickly turned around and looked behind him. He looked at the 8 people walking out as if he was looking at a ghost. How was this possible? How could they possibly be alive? The hidden exorcist standing in the distance did not expect to see Hellion, Vivian and the rest again. In his mind, this group of people should have been trapped in the infinite loop long ago. How could they have followed behind them and reached the second level? What was going on? Didn't you say that you took away all their yellow talismans? How could they still be alive and well and even make it here? Ni Biao questioned his subordinate with his eyes. The exorcist could not face such a question. The image of him seeing Ni Biao just now appeared in his mind again. He was at a loss, as if he had lost his soul. He did not know how this group of people came out. The other party's yellow talismans were still in his bag. There was no reason for them to be safe and sound. In order to sneak in better, he even put on a little disguise, deliberately reducing his presence. Using his advantage, he took advantage of when they weren't paying attention to him and looted all the bags. He did not search except for the two outsiders who did not carry any bags. However, he was sure that the other two did not carry any yellow talismans. The exorcist panicked. In order not to expose his identity, he could not shake his head at Anai Biao. He could only signal with his eyes. At this time, Zhuge Yun heard the noise and immediately pulled down the cloth covering his eyes. His youthful face revealed a relieved smile. "We really made it out. Brother Wei, we really made it out." At this time, Hellion Vivian had also removed the black cloth covering her eyes. She did it even earlier than Zhuge Yun. It was not because she heard the sound but because she felt the faint light. She knew that the exit was not far away. Humans had infinite possibilities. As long as they were trained, they could actually sense light sources even with their eyes closed. The exorcist was even more confused after hearing Zhuge Yun's words. "What do you mean by you really made it out? Brother Yun, Shaoling, why are both of you wearing a cloth covering your faces?" Before Zhuge Yun could say anything, Yiling jumped up excitedly. "It was Brother Wei who told us to guess. After we entered the cave, we encountered a wall of ghosts. We didn't know who took the Chinese talismans from us, so..." "What did you say? The yellow talismans on you were taken away? Then how did you make it out?" When the exorcists heard this, they interrupted Shaoling in surprise before he could finish his sentence. Shaoling pointed at Hellion Vivian. "It was Brother Wei. He thought of a special method. He made us cover our eyes and keep walking forward." Cover our eyes and keep walking forward? The exorcists had never heard of this method before. They could not help but laugh suspiciously. Anai, who glanced at them with disdain and said, "You think you can walk out like this? Who are you trying to fool?" Shaoling was still young. When he was laughed at, his face turned red. However, he was extremely determined. "When you saw us just now, we came out with our eyes covered. Furthermore, each of us had a dog's blood-red rope tied around our hands to prevent Yin energy from entering our bodies. This was all Brother Wei's idea." The exorcists were stunned by his words. Yes, they had seen these people walk out blindfolded with their own eyes. At first, they thought that something had happened. Now that they thought about it carefully, everyone could not help but be shocked. If this was true, then the other party was too powerful. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to get out of the ghost wall without yellow talismans. However, this guy with the surname Wei was able to come out of such a desperate situation. The exorcists were once again in an uproar. Anai, who obviously did not believe it. He mocked. "Then tell us, how did you manage to get out of the ghost wall with your eyes covered? This is completely baseless." So what if they managed to get out? They would not be able to explain it. It was just a blind cat running into a dead mouse. How dare they show off in front of the Ni family? He would like to see how they were going to smooth things over. Chapter 755. Anai, who was sure that they were spouting nonsense. However, at this moment Hellion Wei smiled and walked toward him. Her eyes were cold as she said, "To be honest, I hate to explain to retards. However, since young Master Anai has asked, then I will tell you why you can walk out of the ghost labyrinth with your eyes closed. It's actually a very simple reason that all exorcists know. Ghosts are otherworldly items. If you want to harm someone, you have to come up with some ideas. Some can create dreams, some can create illusions, and the ghost labyrinth is a classic example of a positional illusion. As long as you close your eyes, you won't be able to take advantage of this illusion. After all, ghosts also have intelligence, unlike young Master Anai, who can't think about anything." Anai, who was so angry that his fingers were trembling. This person was clearly implying that he was stupid. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile and raised her eyebrows. "I've explained it so clearly. Young Master Anai, don't tell me that you don't understand?" Hearing this, all the exorcists understood what Hellion Vivian meant. They looked at Anai, who burst into laughter. Anai, whose face turned red and white from the laughter, but he could not find any words to refute. This was because the moment Hellion Vivian finished speaking, Elderly shouted, "Good." Everyone turned their heads and looked at him. Elderly smiled. "This old man is really excited. We have a rule in the Ghost Labyrinth. When we enter the cemetery and come across a path that we can't walk out of, we have to walk with our eyes closed. When we open the coffin, we have to walk with our faces turned away. Until now, this old man still doesn't understand why we have to pay attention to this. Now that I've heard young Master Wei's words, it's as if I've been struck by lightning. This old man doesn't understand exorcism spells, but young Master Wei's method can be used when ordinary people are in danger in the future. It's really excellent." Zhuge Yun did not understand why Brother Wei did not mention the brainwaves, but he had to admit that compared to the first explanation he heard from Brother Wei, this explanation was much easier to understand. After hearing Hellion Wei's words, the other exorcists seemed to have been bewitched. After so many years of exorcism, they had always relied on Dao techniques and had never thought about such things. Now that he was reminded by Hellion Vivian, his eyes lit up. The admiration that surged from the bottom of his heart could not be concealed at all. "Little Brother Wei, old son, have never admired anyone. You are the first." "Me too, I'm impressed. Brother Wei, how did you think of this? How are you so smart? And young Master Yun, you're so calm at such a young age." The more Anai who listened, the more annoyed he became. In the past, this kind of praise was only given to the Anai family. Since when was it the other people's turn? In fact, the other people included Zhuge Yun. Anai Biao was also in a bad mood. He had never expected that the other party would be able to think of a way to escape without a Chinese talisman. It seemed that his technique was still too gentle. He should have waited until there was no one else, then found a place to push them down and bury them alive. Anai who was the closest to Anai Biao, did feel that his father was different from before. However, he did not care as he did not want to continue listening to these praises. He looked around and fixed his gaze on Anai Feng. Without thinking, he changed the topic and pretended to be polite. "Fellow cultivators, can you keep your voices down? My sister is still thinking about the corpses hanging on the roof and how we can safely enter the first floor. This kind of noise will inevitably affect her thoughts." "It's okay, I cough, I'm fine." Anai Feng coughed as she spoke. She seemed to be exhausted and her eyebrows furrowed. "But to think about these problems, we do need some silence." When everyone heard this, they immediately stopped talking. Ever since Xiaoling came out safely, he had an unspeakable suspicion towards the Anai family. He turned around and asked, "What do you need silence to think about?" The exorcists were silent for a moment. Then they pulled him aside and pointed at the corpses hanging on the roof for him to see. Xiaoling's face immediately turned pale without a trace of blood. What is going on?" Guizi and the others, everyone had the same question. Everyone was guessing. The graveyard fell into a dead silence. No one noticed that Hellion Vivian was looking at the white light that flashed across the corpses. She lowered her eyes as if she was thinking about something. "Brother Wei." Zhuge Yun began to stop asking questions. Instead, he asked excitedly, "Do you have a solution?" Hellion Vivian smiled faintly but did not say anything. Then Anai who said indifferently, "Brother Yun, do you think that others can figure out a problem that even my sister has not figured out?" Initially, Hellion Vivian did not intend to say anything. She only wanted to walk over and take all the jewelry. After all, in her eyes, the temptation of money was only comparable to His Highness. Regardless of whether it was Anai Hu or Anai Feng, they had to stand aside. However, some people just had to stop her from making money. This made Hellion Wei slightly unhappy. She turned her head and lazily raised her lower lip. The principle behind this is the same as choosing a door. Eldest young lady Anai unexpectedly couldn't figure it out. It's really interesting. Anai Feng did not say anything. She only smiled gently, but her hands that were hidden under her long sleeves were clenched. Anai who did not know the reason behind this. He sneered, "What do you mean the principle behind this is the same as choosing a door? Brother Wei, did you make a mistake? The one who chose the right door was my sister, not you. Don't speak as if you know everything." "That's right. Now that I've heard what young Master and I said, who was the one who chose the right door?" Hellion Vivian kept the dog blood red string in her hand. "Then let's analyze it properly. Young Master and I, don't you think that I can't figure out these things? Then listen carefully. An I who did not take it seriously because even he did not know that an I Feng was actually borrowing Hellion Vivian's influence. He only sneered, "Brother Wei, I know that you're eloquent. However, if you want to steal other people's credit with your eloquence, my Ni family will not allow it." This time Hellion Wei Wei ignored him. Instead, she stretched out her slender fingers and lazily pointed at the two corpses on top of her head. Her voice was very calm. "I think everyone is like me." When you see this scene, the first question that comes to your mind is, why did these two people who are clearly dead arrive here faster than us, and even appear in front of us in an inconceivable posture? Chapter 756. What's so strange about that? Isn't it just a moving corpse? An I who said disdainfully. Hellion Vivian laughed. Moving corpse? Young master and I, have you ever seen a moving corpse walk faster than a living person? I believe that all the other exorcists know about this. Indeed, the others knew about it. That was why they were even more puzzled. As for an I who, the exorcists glanced at him. It was time to mock him. An I who also knew that he had made a fool of himself. He stammered, So what? Don't forget that the two of them disappeared before we left. Young master and I seems to remember this kind of thing very clearly. However, I would like to ask young master and I, how fast did they have to be able to hang themselves on the roof and in such a position? Hellion Wei Wei looked back absent-mindedly. An I who was speechless. The others looked at him and gradually lost their patience. Young master and I, since you don't know anything, can you not interrupt when Brother Wei is talking? Yiling's words stirred up a wave among the exorcists. Everyone was dissatisfied with an I whose behavior. Their eyes were filled with condemnation. No matter how unwilling an I who was, he could only shut his mouth and turn his head away. He would return this humiliation sooner or later. An I who was jealous, but an I Feng was smart. After listening to Hellion Vivian's words, she suddenly grasped something in her mind. She laughed softly and coughed softly. Actually, I have thought about what young Master Wei said a long time ago. I just didn't know how to say it. When Zhuge Yun heard this, he immediately exploded. His eyes widened and his usually calm face changed. How could this person be so shameless? The first time he eavesdropped on Brother Wei's words, he thought it was his own idea. This time he used the same trick. In fact, he was even more shameless than the last time. He went from the dark side to the bright side and said that he had long thought of what Brother Wei had said. A person like you doesn't deserve to be the Phoenix Maiden. Zhuge Yun couldn't hold it in anymore and blurted out, "You know very well that if you didn't eavesdrop on my conversation with Brother Wei last time, we wouldn't even know which door to enter the tomb. Why is it that before Brother Wei spoke you said that you needed to calm down to think things through, but after Brother Wei spoke you said that you had already thought of it? Lady Ni's way of thinking is really unique." Faced with such a question, the graveyard fell into silence. The exorcists were obviously shocked. They never thought that there would be such a mystery behind the selection of a door. Discussions broke out like a tidal wave. If what Zhuge Yun said is true, then isn't Lady Ni always stealing other people's things? It can't be. Young Lady Ni would never do something so immoral. Is there some misunderstanding? I also think it's impossible. If it wasn't for young Lady Ni, we would have been buried alive in this tomb. Young Lady Ni's body has always been weak. If it wasn't to reduce our danger, she wouldn't have to rush at all. Ni Biao listened to the discussions around him and knew that most people were on the Ni family's side. He took advantage of the situation and sighed, "My eldest daughter is good at many things, but she's too kind. She only thought about how to get everyone to the main coffin as soon as possible and didn't think about other things. Now that you've misunderstood, my dear nephew." As he spoke, he looked at Zhuge Yun. "My dear nephew, I know that all these years, you have a grudge against me and the Ni family. After all, we used to be two equal families. After Brother Zhuge passed away, the Zhuge family was declining day by day, but the Ni family's reputation was getting better and better. Uncle also wants the Zhuge family to do well, but nephew Zhuge is a person. It's fine for him to constantly strive for self-improvement, but he can't rely on others to climb up. Feng'er's hard work has been witnessed by all of you. You jumped out and said that my Feng, do you have any evidence?" Hearing this, the exorcists also asked, That's right, young Master Yun, what evidence do you have to say that about Miss Feng? Zhuge Yun was, after all, young and hot-blooded. He simply could not hold back his straightforward nature. Being questioned like this and unable to produce any substantial evidence, he was so vexed that he wanted to knock on his own head. Feng looked at him from the beginning to the end, as if she already knew that he couldn't produce any evidence. That was why she didn't take them seriously. Relying on her family background and her identity as the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, she was so unscrupulous. He had gone too far. Zhuge Yun was so angry that his eyes turned red. He growled, "Since Uncle An asked, then please tell us what Sister and I had thought through. Why was it inconvenient for her to say it just now? Now that Brother Wei has said it, it's convenient for her to say it." Hellion Vivian's eyes didn't change. Even her expression didn't change. When she heard Zhuge Yun's words, she sighed in her heart. What a silly child. When others set a trap, he would jump right into it. However, when she thought about it, he was just fighting for justice for her. Hellion Vivian didn't say much. She tapped her fingers on the side of her body and pondered indifferently. Zhuge Yun thought that Feng, an impostor, couldn't possibly know what Brother Wei was going to say. However, he didn't expect Feng to continue his words. She coughed softly as if she was wronged but was holding it in. Her voice was very gentle. It's no wonder that Brother Yun misunderstood me. I didn't want to talk about this at first because I didn't want to ruin the relationship between the families. However, it has come to a point where I have no choice but to say it. Just as young Master Wei mentioned earlier, even if the corpses were tainted by the yin qi and stood up, they would walk extremely slowly. It's impossible for them to walk in front of us, and it's even more impossible for them to appear on the roof with such a strange posture so quickly. This is because they didn't come here by themselves, they were carried here. When Feng finished her last sentence, she was stunned. All the exorcists widened their eyes. Even Zhuge Yun was stunned. He subconsciously looked at Hellion Vivian and saw that she didn't object. His heart quickly sank. He suddenly understood that Feng really didn't know anything at the beginning. However, after listening to Brother Wei's words, she was able to quickly connect the dots. This woman was indeed smart. Not only was she smart, but she was also vicious. She allowed him to make a fuss just to smear his and Brother Wei's reputation. Chapter 757. She was right about the reason. Regardless of whether she was the one who came up with it or not, all the credit would be hers. In the end, the incompetent ones would be him and Brother Wei. Not this woman. Shameless. This is too shameless. Zhuge Yun clenched his fists and stared at Feng. He hated the woman in front of him and hated himself for being so impatient. However, if he did not speak up at that time, all the credit would go to Feng again. He was unwilling. Could he just let this woman steal the fruits of Brother Wei's labor? In the end, the thief would gain fame and love. However, the person who created the credit would be framed and discredited. Zhuge Yun only felt a lump in his throat and a sour feeling welled up in his heart. What a fucking grievance. Feng looked at Zhuge Yun's expression and her voice became softer as if she had finally proven her innocence. Her tone was filled with pity. The reason why I didn't say this was because I was worried that everyone would be dissatisfied after hearing it. After all, it was indeed worrying that there was a spy among us. I didn't expect Brother Yun to misunderstand. After hearing Lady Ni's words, now that I think about it, it is indeed so. To be able to make these two people appear here with us in such a strange position on the roof of the palace, someone must have done something. The exorcists fell silent and looked at each other. They had already determined that Feng's words were the answer. Finally, their eyes fell on Zhuge Yun. Young Master Yun, you have indeed misunderstood Miss Anai this time. In the future you should think carefully before you say anything. As an exorcist, we all respect your father's work. Don't let the 100 years of honor that he has created for the Zhuge clan be ruined by your hands. These words were extremely serious. In ancient times, the most important thing for a clan was its reputation, let alone the exorcist clan. Zhuge Yun had been working hard since he was young. He did not want to fall behind because he did not want to let his father down. However, now, Zhuge Yun clenched his fists tighter, but there was nothing he could do. Although Yiling wanted to help, he didn't have the strength to do so. This was because they already knew that there was a spy in the team when they encountered the ghost wall. This proved that Miss Nee's analysis was correct. Guizi and the others were dragged here by a spy. An eye whose face was full of pride. He knew that as long as his sister was here, Zhuge Yun and the two outsiders could only play with them. Did they think that they could win against his sister with some tricks? He couldn't be any more naive. This time it's all over. An eye who was undoubtedly the most delighted one. An eye Biao also felt that he had vented his anger and was about to say something. Just as he was about to say something, a clear voice sounded from the side again. There is indeed a spy, but the reason why Guizi and the rest are here is not because of a spy. Miss Anai, it seems that you really don't know why I didn't choose the East Gate. It was Hellion Vivian. Her lips curled into a smile. It was so bright that it made people feel a sense of sharpness breaking out of the ground. Since you didn't hear everything when you were eavesdropping, I can tell you now why you couldn't choose the East Gate. It's because there's something hidden there. That thing is not a spy but a creature that lives in ancient tombs such as corpse puppets. Of course it's not a corpse puppet. As for what it is I can tell you later. Now it's my turn to ask Miss Anai. When we entered the tomb, there were a total of 33 people excluding Guizi and the other person who died. At that time, those 33 people were still in everyone's line of sight and could testify for each other. If it was really a spy, it would take time for him to drag people here. May I ask, how did he carry Guizi and the other person's bodies here in front of everyone without being discovered? An iPhone was stunned by Hellion Vivian's question. She did not say anything. Her face was hidden behind the white veil so no one could see her expression. She just slowly clenched her fingers. An eye who spoke at this time, Brother Wei, are you really smart or just pretending to be smart? If you want to avoid our eyes, you could have just walked through another gate. Why would you ask my sister such a stupid question? It seems that you're really at your wits' end. That's why you came up with something stupid like, this is actually caused by another creature in the tomb, to deceive everyone. I didn't expect young Master Ni to be enlightened, Hellion Vivian said to Ni, who with a faint smile, her thin lips curved into a mocking smile. Ni, whose face darkened, what do you mean? Nothing, I just agree with what young Master Ni said. Hellion Vivian spoke very slowly with a lazy tone. Young Master Ni also said that if we want to avoid everyone's eyes, we have to walk through another gate. Do you still remember that after we passed through the south gate we came across two entrances on the left and right? At that time Master Ni asked us to regroup. He said that only those who were loyal to the Ni family would be brought along with him. Those who were not loyal to him would have to be split into groups. Okay, here's the main point. How many people were there at that time? 33 people. That's right, no more no less, a total of 33 people. In other words, there were no fewer people who walked through the south gate with us. Since everyone walked through the south gate, where did the spy come from? An eye who was dumbfounded by Hellion Wei's precise and meticulous repetition of the numbers in her memory. He stood there like a fool. His eyes were wide open and he couldn't utter a single word. The others gasped in shock when they heard Hellion Vivian's last sentence. The truth was laid out in front of them. Every number was extremely convincing. They had no choice but to believe that young Master Wei was right. The exorcists were reminded by Hellion Vivian. They instantly thought of something. Once again the earth-shattering sounds of discussion rang out. That's right. When we were splitting into groups, everyone was present. It's impossible for anyone to walk through another gate. In other words, the corpses of Guizi and the others were not moved by a spy. Of course not. Didn't you hear what Brother Wei said? It's not a spy who did this. There's something in this tomb that we don't know about. God, if that's the case, young Master and I. Chapter 758. Everyone turned to look at an iPhone. At this point, it was clear that the one at fault was the young lady of the Ni family, not Brother Wei. An iPhone clenched her fists so tightly that her hands, which were hidden under her long sleeves, were sinking into her palms. An eye who could no longer be arrogant, and even his body shrunk back. He did not believe that anyone could win against his elder sister. Hellion Vivian, on the other hand, remained calm. Now, let's talk about the creature that moved the corpses of Guizi and the others here. After everyone came in, all of our attention was on Guizi and the others because the fact that they were able to walk in front of us was too unbelievable. This took up most of everyone's attention, causing everyone to overlook a very fatal problem, and that was the corpses themselves. After a person dies, the corpse will reflect a lot of information. For example, right now all of the corpses were suspended in a very strange posture. Their limbs seemed to have been dissected and hung unnaturally, making them look like puppets that were being manipulated with countless strings behind them. In fact, this was not an illusion, but the corpses were indeed being manipulated. However, that thing didn't rely on strings to control these corpses. There was a type of string that was even stronger than the strings used by humans. Not only that, it also had a sticky substance that could quickly capture its prey and bind it tightly. This kind of silk is usually not easy to find as it has a good concealment ability. It will only reflect a silver light when it shines on it. As she spoke, Hellion Vivian raised the torch in her hand and tried to shine it on the nearest corpse. Everyone widened their eyes to look, only to see a thin silver wire flash past the corpse's knee. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to see it at all. What was that? Hellion Vivian looked at an iPhone. Gwizzy and the others' corpses did indeed disappear at the east gate, but just by relying on the blind spot, they would not have disappeared so quickly that no one had a chance to react. It was just a turn of the head, and when they turned around again, the two corpses were already gone. Such a fast speed is not normal at all. All living things, regardless of whether they were humans or other things, would leave behind traces as long as they passed through a place. However, there were no traces at the east gate at that time. This had always bothered me. What kind of thing could take away those two corpses without showing up? I couldn't figure it out at that time, so I didn't choose the east gate. In fact, according to Feng Shui, that gate was the closest to the main coffin. Didn't Miss Anai have a lot of thoughts when she was choosing the door? Then can you tell everyone why the east door is the closest to the main coffin? Anai Feng was completely frozen. She could not utter a single word. Both of them were well aware that even her previous choice was based on the other person's thoughts. Why was the east gate closest to the main coffin? How could she possibly know? Anai Feng's clenched fingers tightened. If it could be said that people's eyes were only filled with suspicion at the beginning, they were now filled with shock. The eldest daughter of the Anai family was really plagiarizing from beginning to end. Sister? Anai, who was so anxious that his face was sweating. He turned around and sneered at Hellion Vivian. Brother Wei, if there's anything you want to say, just say it. Don't keep asking my sister this and that. Hellion Vivian's thin lips curved into a half smile. The reason is very simple. It's because the west gate with the most corpse puppets is where the servants are buried. The tomb was originally built from west to east along the dragon vein. Under normal circumstances, experienced masters would consider this point when building an ancient tomb. They would place the main coffin in the deepest part of the tomb, which is the furthest away from the buried person. This is to show the master's supreme status. I believe that Elderly knows this better than I do. Hellion Vivian looked at Elderly as she said this. Elderly nodded approvingly and said, Brother Wei is right. No matter if it's the nobles or the bureaucrats, when the masters are building a tomb, they would usually use this method to prevent future generations from disturbing them. They would let the servants stand in front of them to block the entrance. This way they would be able to block a lot of people. Most of the tomb robbers would be misled by the coffins and mechanisms in front of them and die before they could reach the main coffin. This time the entrance to the tomb that we entered was left behind by someone who was searching for the dragon cave. We only encountered 4 doors when we were halfway through the tomb. Hellion Vivian smiled and continued, therefore the main coffin would definitely be placed in the opposite direction of the west gate, the east gate. This gate is also the closest to the main coffin. When the exorcists heard this, they were all a little dumbfounded. They had never considered the problem of the direction of the tomb. Although it was shown from the competition data at the beginning, no one would care about such trivial matters. However, this person with the surname Wei was actually so meticulous. He could deduce the exact location of the main coffin with just a few clues. This kind of strategy was truly admirable. Hellion Wei did not let go of her gaze. She continued to stare at an iPhone with a faint smile. I think Miss and I must be very confused about why I didn't say that she was a spy, but instead, led her to think that she was a spy from the start. The reason is simple. I just wanted to see if someone would try to steal my idea again like the last time. Sure enough, Miss and I opened her mouth very quickly, even faster than I thought. It seems that reputation is really very attractive to Miss Anai. As Hellion Vivian's last sentence ended, Anai Feng's back trembled heavily. It turned out that this person did it on purpose from the beginning. He deliberately left his words unfinished so that he could lure her into his trap. When Zhuge Yun scolded her just now, she thought that he had fallen into her trap. Although this person with the surname Wei only said the first half of his sentence, she was very clear in her heart that he wanted to say the word spy. Anai Feng was confident that she would not make a mistake, which was why she dared to do so. Even if Zhuge Yun jumped out, she was not afraid. The reason was simple. This kind of reasoning was supposed to be based on who said it first. Zhuge Yun's ruckus would only make their group more unbearable. However, she did not expect that this person had already set her up from the beginning. It was fine if she did not speak. Once she spoke, it meant that she had already fallen into this person's trap. If she had restrained herself when Zhuge Yun was speaking, she could have saved the situation. At least she would not have been involved in the previous incident. However, at that time she thought that the person who had fallen into the trap was him. No, it was not what she thought. It was this person who did not stop her at that time on purpose, giving her the illusion that she had already won. Chapter 759. In fact, that was the beginning of the game for the other party. The more her father and brother slandered Zhuge Yun, the better. At that time, the Anai family's reputation would be slapped even harder. This Wei fella wanted to skin her alive. She and the Anai family would not even have a way to disguise themselves. What a ruthless method. Anai Feng was a smart person. It was not difficult for her to understand Hellion Vivian's words. Anai Biao had always been astute. As soon as Hellion Vivian said those words, he knew that they had fallen into the other party's trap. For so many years they had never been forced to this extent. Even his beloved daughter was dragged into this mess. Anai Biao felt his face hurt, but he could not resist the crowd's criticism. So it's for the sake of reputation. This is really... Someone shook his head with a face full of disappointment. It's too unbecoming of the Phoenix girl. She took someone else's idea as her own. This is not something that the exorcising tribe would do. The voices of the crusade were getting louder. Although they were much quieter, everyone could hear them clearly. Zhuge Yun took a deep breath. His originally sour mood had turned into the agitation in the deepest part of his blood. He had almost given up on defending himself. This was because he knew that no matter what he said, he could not compare to the Anai family's influence. Moreover, the person who took away someone else's credit was the Lady Anai, who was known as the Phoenix Girl. His heart started to turn cold. However, that person had once again created a miracle. Zhuge Yun excitedly looked at Hellion Vivian. He had decided. The Phoenix Girl was too far away from him. He might not be able to see the exorcist that he admired the most in his life. However, Brother Wei was different. Brother Wei was standing right in front of him. Brother Wei would be his goal in the future. The young man's thoughts turned quickly. His eyes were shining brightly. Hellion Vivian looked at him and felt an inexplicable pressure. In fact, if it was not because of Zhuge Yun's unspoken wish, she would not care about what Anai Feng did. Her purpose in entering the ancient tomb was simple. It was to find the Sarira to eliminate the evil in her baby. However, some people were always insatiable. It was one thing to impersonate him, but to impersonate him in such a shameless manner. Hellion Wei Wei let out a mocking laugh as she watched the exorcists in the graveyard attack the Anai family coldly. Elderly, who had been saved by Phoenix Girl before, couldn't bear to see such a scene. He bent his back and stood up. There must be some misunderstanding here. Little Brother Wei, this old man knows Phoenix Girl's character the best. If she hadn't appeared in this old man's dream, the entire village would have died. Such a kind-hearted person wouldn't steal other people's credit. Seeing that Elderly was on their side, Anai who immediately said, Elderly is right, there must be some misunderstanding. Take Brother Wei for example. From the beginning to the end, you kept talking bad about my sister and even thought of a trap for my sister to fall into. However, you never clearly told everyone what that unknown creature you were talking about was. I've never heard of anything that can drag someone away without showing its face. Don't tell me that even you don't know what it is. That's why you kept tangling with the matter of choosing the door so that everyone couldn't focus. You were afraid that everyone would question you again in the next episode. The reason why Ni who made such a guess was because Hellion Vivian said that she didn't think it through at that time. Since she didn't think it through at that time, it was impossible for her to think it through now. After all, it had only been a short 2 hours. Ni who continued, that was a close call. If it wasn't for Senior Lee's words, my sister would have become your shield to fool everyone. It's just a small thing on the corpse, not some gold or silver. You've been exaggerating. You said that this is a kind of silk that's more reliable than the thread used by humans, and that it can quickly capture prey and bind them tightly. Hehe. Is there such a thread? Why haven't I heard of it before? After saying that, Ni who sneered and turned his face away. Hellion Vivian's voice lightly interrupted his arrogance. With young Master Ni's intelligence, it's not strange that you haven't heard of it before. You. Ni who was so angry that the veins on his forehead were popping out. His hands instantly clenched into iron fists. Hellion Vivian walked towards Ni who with unprecedented coldness in her eyes. First of all, the one who did wrong is your Ni family. It was your sister who carried out a shameless theft and took other people's things as her own. This isn't a matter of being a shield. Secondly, there are some things that you haven't heard of, but it doesn't mean that everyone is as ignorant as your Ni family. You're talking nonsense again. Don't think that you can attack us like this, Spider Silk. Before Ni who could finish his sentence, Hellion Wei Wei calmly interrupted him. No matter how stupid young Master Ni is, you should know the characteristics of the spider's silk. Sticky and tough at the same time. Once a prey falls into it, it will be trapped to death. Although there are no obvious traces of a web here, the silver silk that flashed past the corpses is real. How did it become a good thing that isn't worth mentioning in your eyes? Ni who felt like he was punched in the face. He didn't expect that the other party could find a type of silk that matched his description. Spider silk. He actually made a fool of himself in front of others because of something that was commonly seen. Hellion Wei Wei looked at him with a mocking smile. Moreover, if the initiator was a spider, it could have stayed in the East Gate and not shown itself. All it needed to do was to use the spider silk to entangle Guizi and the others and quickly pull them back. Then it could drag the corpses away without anyone noticing. After listening to Hellion Vivian's last word, Ni who felt like all the energy in his body had been drained away. He felt an unprecedented fear. How could the person in front of him be so smart? It was as if nothing could escape from this person's mind. This was really too scary. Not only Ni who, but even Ni Biao started to doubt whether he had prejudiced himself because of the fact that the other party did not have spiritual energy. This person was not an amateur but a master. A master who was extremely dangerous to the Ni family's victory. Ni Biao lowered his eyes. There seemed to be something churning in the bottom of his eyes, but no one noticed the black aura that came out of them. Only a certain huge shadow hidden in the ancient tomb looked at the scene reflected in the mirror and gave a sinister smile. I didn't expect that you could guess my identity. But even so, these people are still dead meat. Since the leader is in trouble, the ending won't be good. Let's kill each other quickly. This way he would have the opportunity to taste the fresh and tender fetus that he couldn't forget. Chapter 760. Old Lee turned around and looked at Hellion Vivian. What followed was a surge of admiration from the bottom of his heart. His respect for Ni Feng was because she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. His admiration for this little brother Wei was because of his astonishing strength again and again. Everyone had seen spider silk before, but when they thought about it carefully, who would associate it with the current situation? What's more, even though they saw a sliver of silver light, they couldn't clearly see what it was. Only little brother Wei would have such an agile mind. All exorcists knew that in order to understand everything clearly in a short period of time, apart from wisdom, one must also have a strong reserve of knowledge. Not just anyone could do it. This person was really amazing. If he had spiritual energy, how powerful would he be? Old Lee didn't dare to think about it. In order to prevent the Ni clan from being attacked again, Ni Biao couldn't help but say, since we know what happened to the corpse in front of us, shouldn't we continue to move forward and try to reach the main coffin as soon as possible? At this point he had to think of a way to save the Ni clan's face. He couldn't let the Ni clan fall into a disadvantageous position again. The best opportunity now was for them to take the lead and pass under the corpse. Since it was the spider silk, there was nothing to be worried about. Ni Biao could see that the spider that spat out the silk wasn't there, so now was the best time to pass through. Moreover, even if something unexpected happened, sending 2 people out would allow him to analyze what kind of danger was ahead. After thinking about this, Ni Biao looked behind him. What the Ni clan didn't lack the least was people. These disciples were raised by him since they were young so that they could be of use in the future. Qingshan, Qingshui, the 2 of you go first. Ni Biao ordered the 2 people behind him. Both of them were disciples of the Ni family. They were highly talented and had outstanding spiritual energy among the group. They were born to look down on exorcists from other families besides the Ni family. When they heard Ni Biao's words, they raised their chins and replied, "Yes, master." The 2 of them glanced at each other. Then one of them took out a yellow talisman while the other took out a peachwood sword. They were in high spirits and ready to go. At this time, the exorcists were looking at the Ni family in a different light. Initially, they had already regarded the Ni family as a villain, but Ni Biao's actions had moved them. After all, at times like this, no one would take the lead. Moreover, Ni Biao's natural order made them feel that they had misunderstood Ni Feng. Especially after hearing Ni Biao's words, Ni Feng coughed lightly and exhorted, "Be careful." Her gentle voice was accompanied by the soothing spiritual energy from her body. To be honest, that frail appearance of hers was very distressing. Hellion Vivian looked at the scene in front of her and didn't say anything. She only smiled. Compared to Ni Biao and Ni Feng were much more difficult to deal with. This pair of father and daughter already understood the human heart too well. They knew exactly what to do at what time, and even more so, they knew how to dispel other people's suspicions. At this time, it was undoubtedly dangerous to send one of his own people to take the lead. However, the exorcists only thought that Ni Biao was thinking for others, but they didn't think that the person taking the lead was not himself, but the disciples of the Ni family. These disciples did not have the blood of the Ni family flowing in them. They were extremely talented children who were selected from all over the country. They were trained as exorcists since young. Although their surname was Ni, in fact they were just pawns. This was because if Ni Biao saw them as one of his own, he would not be so generous and push them out without any hesitation. In fact, the reason was very simple. Ni Biao would not let Ni who take the lead no matter what, because Ni who was his son, and the others were just his disciples. Hellion Vivian did not like Ni Biao's way of doing things. She was the queen of firearms and had many brothers under her command. Every time when there was a need for firearms, she would not let her brothers take the lead. Obviously, His Highness had seen through Ni Biao's thoughts. He stood behind Hellion Vivian with his long legs half bent and his body leaning against the stone wall. He crossed his arms and smiled wickedly, his eyes full of mockery. Humans only knew how to play dirty tricks. However, as a demon he still liked to see humans killing each other. Perhaps it was because Beligaju's smile was too inappropriate. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and thought about it according to His Highness's perverted thoughts. She asked, "You seem to be very happy." "Not bad." Beligaju's smile deepened. His graceful and noble voice was low and pleasant. "Stay away from them. Don't get stained by the blood." Hellion Vivian was speechless. Was that the main point? Wait a minute. His Highness just said that there was blood. Hellion Vivian knew that Beligaju would never say something without a reason. She raised her head again and looked in front of her. Something was wrong. Since there was a demon guarding it, even if that demon was no longer around, it would not allow outsiders to enter so easily. Just as Hellion Vivian had this thought, she saw that Qing Shan and Qing Shui, who had just barged in, seemed to be caught by something. Then, followed by a scream. Their complacent faces were filled with unprecedented fear. Then their throats were slit by a silver thread. Blood spurted out from their bodies like a fountain, staining the ground. Qing Shan's situation was better. At least he still had a breath to struggle. Qing Shui, on the other hand, was in trouble. Before he could stick the yellow talisman, the silver wire took his last breath. Then with a force he was hung on the roof of the palace. Everything happened too quickly. By the time people reacted, they only had time to see the intricate silver threads that wrapped around Qing Shui's body. Those silver threads retreated at a very fast speed. Once the prey was fixed in place, it would become transparent. If one did not use a torch to illuminate it, it would be impossible to discover it. Qing Shan, who was standing in the middle, waved the peachwood sword in his hand like a madman. However, there was no effect. The silver wire was too sticky. It was impossible to cut it off when it touched the sword. Moss Master, save Gu, save me. Qing Shan's fingers stretched forward, desperately trying to reach this side. Even before death, he still wholeheartedly believed that his master would save him. And Ai Biao also took a step forward. In the eyes of others, he really did want to save Qing Shan. However, Hellion Vivian knew that the step was taken very carefully. He did not step into the area of the spider web. Chapter 761. There was no saving Qing Shan because the more you struggled, the tighter the spider silk would bind you. The smell of blood filled the entire tomb. Just like that, Qing Shan and Qing Shui were hung up, dripping with blood. Just like all the corpses, their postures were extremely strange. The curve on their faces wasn't a smile, but an illusion created by the spider's silk. The young exorcists vomited on the spot when they saw this. Even old Li's face was extremely pale. When the crowd saw the scene before them, they no longer dared to act rashly. Their eyes were shaking, and it was obvious that they were scared witless. There were too many factors in this tomb that they could not control. It was still the same old saying. If they had encountered something like a ghost or demon, they would not be afraid. However, everything in the mausoleum was too evil. They were like lambs that were being slaughtered with bare hands. They had no way of predicting what would happen next. What do we do now? The path ahead was definitely sealed. Looking at Qing Shan and Qing Shui's corpses, they finally understood why there were so many corpses here. These corpses were not all transported here from other places. Most of them were probably caught by the spider silk when they were on the path and were hung on the roof. That was why there were so many of them. There were no less than 40 of them. It was just like how Qing Shan and Qing Shui's lives were taken away by the hidden spider silk the moment they took a step forward. Not to mention that the next tomb entrance was a whole room away. No matter what, they would have to take more than 10 steps to reach the next tomb entrance. What would happen? Some of the exorcists wiped the sweat off their foreheads and roared in a low voice, "It's useless. We can't reach the main coffin. Why don't we get out now while everyone is still alive?" That's right. Someone seconded. The rules of the competition also state that participants have the right to give up. I want to leave too. Out of the 30 or so people, about 10 of them wanted to go back. They weren't joking. Some of them even lowered their heads and started to pack up their things. Since they couldn't win, they might as well take the opportunity to leave now. At least they could save their lives. Who knew what they would encounter if they continued to walk? A few strands of spider silk could take away 2 lives in the blink of an eye. Thinking about it again, they had yet to encounter this creature in the graveyard. A giant spider was hiding in this cemetery, staring at them in the dark. Just thinking about it made them shiver all over. And Ai Biao did not stop the exorcist. After all, the more people who quit, the better it was for him. Although he had thought about it, the way back was not necessarily safe. However, Hellion Vivian was different. She raised her eyes and interrupted everyone's fantasy. "We can't get out." "Why?" After what happened just now, the exorcist started to pay more attention to Hellion Vivian's words. Hellion Vivian glanced at the corpses hanging on the ceiling before retracting her gaze. She said unhurriedly, "Spiders are creatures that don't just weave their webs in one place. They are best at trapping their prey. Unlike other creatures that like to eat live prey, spiders like to wait until their prey is unable to retaliate before appearing. Before that happens, they will weave many webs to tightly bind their prey. I didn't expect a human to know my way of doing things so well." The gigantic creature in the dark narrowed its long and narrow eyes at the reflection in the mirror. It took a step forward with its countless feet. "It seems that I need to prepare more before I can eat the baby in her belly. Just thinking about that delicious taste, it really makes one yearn for it." Tap. The water stains were brushed away by the tentacles. The giant shadow flashed past with its silver silk. Its lips were constantly moving, and it once again hid in the deep darkness. Only its red eyes could be faintly seen. At the side of the graveyard, the exorcists were very puzzled. They frowned and asked, "It's not that we haven't heard of spiders' habits, but does this have anything to do with us going out?" Hellion Vivian saw that the exorcists could not understand her, so she decided to be straightforward. "Who can guarantee that you won't encounter spider webs when you go back? There weren't any when we came here, right?" The exorcist's thoughts had yet to change. Hellion Vivian twitched the corner of her mouth. She was very helpless. "There weren't any when we came here, but it doesn't mean that there won't be any when we go back. That spider could have taken advantage of the time when we were standing here to seal our way in. This is called trapping its prey. That's impossible. That's absolutely impossible." The exorcists cried out softly. Although they said that it was impossible, they believed Hellion Vivian in their hearts. Otherwise, the bags on their shoulders would not have slipped off. Exorcists were also humans. Naturally, they were afraid of death. "If it's really like what Brother Wei said, then aren't we? Aren't we going to die?" They had seen the power of spider webs. Now all the exits might be entangled by that spider. No matter where they went, they would not be able to escape. Why did it do that? Why didn't it just come and eat us? Some exorcists punched the wall fiercely. If they were face to face, they might not necessarily lose. Hellion Vivian thought to herself, if you can think of a solution, how can the spider not think of one? It's an ancient tomb. I reckon that the spider that lives here has already become a demon. Whether it's its body or its mind, from our current experience, that spider is not easy to deal with. Hellion Vivian's voice was very normal. It knows that as long as it blocks all the exits, we will starve to death in less than 7 days. Even if we don't starve to death, the water bottles we carry will run out. Sooner or later we will die from lack of water. When that time comes, it will come out and eat everything it wants to eat. When all the exorcists heard her last sentence, they could not help but shudder. Only Bailey Jiaju's reaction was different. He chuckled softly, his voice was extremely graceful and luxurious, and there was a hint of disdain in his indifference. Such aesthetic dining etiquette, only a stupid creature like the spider demon would do it. It's really unsightly. Everyone was speechless. Is this the time to comment on dining etiquette? Why does it seem like he's not on the same page as us? Seeing that everyone was looking at His Highness differently, Hellion Vivian could not help but cough lightly and change the topic. "So we can only go forward now. We can't go back. The faster the better." "Easy for you to say," and I who glanced at Hellion Vivian. "If we go forward, will you take the lead?" Chapter 762. Upon hearing this, everyone stopped in their tracks. His gaze towards Ni, who was filled with disapproval. Ni, who did not know that because of his repeated provocations, the exorcist's respect for the Ni family had already cracked. He was still holding his chin up and looking at Hellion Vivian with his eyebrows raised. Everyone knew that no one would take the lead in such a situation because walking into the spider web area was a dead end. Qing Shan and Qing Shui were the best examples. He did not believe that the other party could still be so arrogant in such a situation. In the face of Ni, whose pride, Hellion Wei Wei merely glanced at him indifferently. Then she turned around and asked an unimportant question. "Does the competition system still count?" "Competition system? What competition system?" At that moment, some people could not react as they were still in the midst of a competition. After a moment of hesitation, they nodded and replied, "Yes, the one who reaches the main coffin the fastest and clears the most obstacles wins." "Very good." After getting the answer she wanted, Hellion Wei Wei bent down and picked up a piece of stone. Then she stepped forward and walked over. Zhuge Yun's eyes were wide open. He reached out to stop her. "Brother Wei, don't. You don't have to be angry with Ni, who he has always been." "Angry?" Hellion Wei Wei blinked her eyes, then said, "Oh, with his level he's not worth my attention. Aren't we having a competition? We can only win if we clear more obstacles." Her goal had always been clear. Saraira, Saraira. Hearing Hellion Vivian's words, Zhuge Yun was stunned. So it was to win. No, even if it was to win, it was too dangerous. Before Zhuge Yun could finish his sentence, Hellion Vivian had already walked in front of him. Ni, who was infuriated by Hellion Wei Wei's arrogant attitude of disregarding him. He narrowed his eyes and waited for her to die a horrible death. The exorcists also frowned and looked at the center with solemn expressions. From the bottom of their hearts, they didn't want this little brother to die. Some people wanted to replace Hellion Vivian to go first, but they didn't have the slightest clue as to how to cross the spider web, so they could only stand in place and wait. Hellion Wei Wei bent down and picked up another stone. There were already 7 or 8 stones in her hand, all of which were nimbly tossed into the palm of her hand. No one could understand why she did this. When she threw the first stone forward, a ball of spider silk rolled out. Only then did the exorcists widen their eyes. Their eyes shook back and forth in disbelief. How could this work? Hellion Wei Wei continued to throw the pebbles forward. Her walking posture was very leisurely and slow. Often she would wait until the pebbles rolled out a ball of spider silk before she took a step forward. That kind of lazy appearance looked as if she was playing very indifferent. No one knew that in the eyes of the mercenary queen, spider silk was simply too weak. In any case, as long as you threw something over, you could break the patterns. It was unlike modern lasers, which were endless. Even if you wore optically sensitive glasses, you would still be in danger. Wei Wei pursed her thin lips. Along with the last stone thrown out, she had already walked to the entrance of the next cave. She absent-mindedly patted the dust off her hands. After that, she turned around and looked behind her. Her long, shapely eyebrows slightly raised as she said, "All right, you guys can follow the path that I walked." Yuga Yun was stunned. The exorcists even forgot to breathe at that moment. Only Bailey Jiaju moved. Compared to Hellion Wei Wei, he seemed to have more of the elegance unique to aristocrats. His posture was originally tall and straight. When his pair of slender legs moved forward, it was even more difficult for people to ignore. Everyone's eyes widened as they watched him walk in front of Hellion Wei Wei without missing a single step. Then, he took her hand and wiped it with a handkerchief. Juga Yun was speechless. Brother Ju's love for cleanliness was really too much. However, why did he feel that the scene just now was very beautiful? They were clearly 2 men. Was there any love or gentleness? He must have seen wrongly. Juga Yun shook his head. The poor young man thought that he was gay. He was so scared. After calming himself down, Juga Yun followed them. When he walked, he was much more cautious than Hellion Vivian. He was afraid that he would take a wrong step. In fact, there was nothing to be afraid of. Hellion Vivian walked over because she knew that as long as the spider was not around, the spider web was dead. Once it was broken, it could not be repaired unless it came back and spun silk again. Juga Yun finally reached the other side. He was so nervous that his forehead was covered in sweat. After he relaxed, he immediately said to Xiao Ling and the others, "It's okay, come over here." At this time, an eye whose expression could no longer be described as ugly. Especially when Xiao Ling said to him before she left, "You don't have the ability, but you still dare to provoke Boss Wei. You're really thick-skinned." In the past, an eye who would never pay attention to people like Xiao Ling. This was because all the exorcists in the exorcist city worshipped the Ni family as their role model. When did they start to mock him like this? Ni Biao was also aware of this. Unknowingly, these people no longer believed in his words as the truth as they used to. He had lived for so long and used all his efforts to suppress other families. In order to be respected, he did not hesitate to frame his best friend Zhuge Sheng. He wanted to rule the entire exorcist tribe one day. It was not easy for him to achieve his goal, but his plan was affected by an outsider. Ni Biao clenched his teeth for a moment but soon relaxed. It was not because of anything else but because Elderly was still on their side. Yes, his daughter was the reincarnated Phoenix Girl. As long as the Phoenix Girl was around, no matter how powerful the other party was, they would not be able to shake the foundation of the Ni family. To the exorcist tribe, the Phoenix Girl was a godlike existence. However, he really should think of a way to get rid of those 2 people. At least he should kill the one with the surname Wei first. As soon as he thought of this, a sinister laugh rang in his ears. It was very low and hoarse. "I can help you. As long as you send the one with the surname Wei to me, I will eat her." Who's talking? Ni Biao looked behind him, but there was no one there. Suddenly he felt a chill down his spine. His fingers subconsciously pulled out the peachwood sword at his waist. "You don't have to look for me anymore. You can't see me." The voice laughed. Sounded like a spider crawling on the ground. It was very scary. Chapter 763. I'm talking to your heart and your heart is telling me that you need my help. After this, the next hole will be very dark. There's a protrusion on the left side of the wall. You just need to press it and the person walking in front of you will fall into each hole. Even if they don't die, they will have to start from a new place. You and your NI family army will be the ones walking in front. What do you think? Do you want to do it? NI Biao did not answer, but at that moment, something seemed to emerge from his eyes, glowing eerily. The black spider knew that he was tempted, so it laughed again. Don't worry, no one will know that you're the one who did it because it will only look like an accident, like the person walking in front accidentally triggered the mechanism in the ancient tomb. I promise you. NI Biao interrupted it. But you have to promise me that you'll kill those two people. Sure. The black spider smiled when it answered. It was not stupid enough to provoke the man whose identity it could not figure out until now. It just wanted to use this resentful human to achieve its own goals, such as sending the man away so that it could enjoy the baby that it had been longing for. Thinking of this, the black spider stuck out its scarlet tongue and licked in front of it. It could not wait any longer. No one could hear the deal between NI Biao and the demon. Even his son NI, who did not know why his father suddenly paused. Everything seemed normal. The exorcists walked forward one by one and entered a long tunnel. The tunnel was just like what NI Biao had heard. It was very dark and narrow and only one person could fit through it. Those who were slightly fatter had to walk sideways. Even so, they had to walk because there was only one path in front of them. When Helian Weiwei was in the modern world, she often read books about grave robbing. The layout of all tombs was basically one layer after another. Usually when they encountered such an extremely narrow tunnel, it meant that they were not far away from the main coffin. Helian Vivian knew that they could not stay in the ancient tomb for too long. It was not her fault, but she was afraid that the baby would be affected in the tomb. The smaller fetus was indeed affected. The deeper they went, the fainter his aura became. As for the bigger fetus, he was practicing military boxing in Helian Vivian's stomach. He also swept around to see if there were any undead that could be eaten. Then he very coolly hugged the smaller fetus and said, "It will be fine when we get out of here. When the time comes, I will give you all the spirit energy that Mother fed us. You should eat more." Yes. The small fetus was already a little listless. It did not know why, but it had a very uncomfortable feeling as if it was being watched by something. It was very uneasy. As if sensing the emotions of the smaller fetus, the bigger fetus did not even think about it and planted a kiss on its forehead. Don't let your mind wander. Big Brother is here. Small fetus, I feel like Big Brother is learning more and more words now. He even knows how to use random thoughts. But is it appropriate to use random thoughts here? The bigger fetus mistook the smaller fetus' suspicion for admiration. He was very happy and puffed out his chest proudly. The small fetus was speechless. Forget it, it was better not to expose Big Brother. Let him continue to be happy. Helian Vivian sensed the movement in her stomach. She rubbed her stomach and wanted to walk forward. Beligaju pulled her back. His slender fingers pointed behind him. His voice was very calm, but there was a hint of sincerity in his voice that only appeared in front of Helian Vivian. Are you an idiot? Do you always want to rush forward? Stand behind me and follow me closely. Okay. Helian Vivian knew that His Highness was protecting her. Although the way His Highness protected her was always different from normal people, it was fine as long as she understood. The two of them walked one after the other. In the beginning they were still holding hands. However, this posture was inconvenient, especially when Helian Vivian's other hand was still holding a torch. She had to turn her body sideways. Later, Beligaju also sensed her tiredness. He reminded her, "Look under your feet." Then he let go of Helian Vivian's hand. Helian Vivian was not a delicate woman. Under normal circumstances she was very good at fighting and was very sharp. Along the way she even observed the ground. Even if there was a trap she would be able to discover it in time. However, she did not know that the danger was not in front of her but behind her. There was a loud boom. Before anyone could react to what was happening, their bodies started to fall rapidly. Everything was dark as far as the eye could see. Screams rang out at the same time. Even though she was falling, Helian Vivian did not forget to protect her stomach. When she really touched the ground, she used her arms to land. In this way, although her stomach was protected, it could not avoid the fracture. However, compared to those who did not have skills, her landing was much better. Even though she had lost the spiritual energy and martial chi to protect her body, she relied on her rich experience to survive. Although one of her arms was soft and could not move, she had achieved her goal. However, she had achieved her goal. Protecting the baby was more important than anything else. On the other hand, Baligaju was not as open-minded as Hellion Vivian. His feet were suspended in mid-air. At this time his soul-stirring eyes had turned into a deep gold. His black robe seemed to have sensed the hostility from its master, and it tore apart the silence of the tomb. At that moment, almost all the undead in the ancient tomb trembled in fear. How could this be? What kind of person came to the ancient tomb? Why were they so afraid? The fear that came from the deepest part of their blood made them bend down. There was no answer. Even Ni Biao did not expect the man in front of him to be able to avoid the disaster just now. How fast did he have to be to do that? He was so abnormal that he did not seem like a human being. Baligaju was not in the mood to look at the people around him. He narrowed his eyes and quickly swept to his left. At this time the black spider did not know that it had provoked the most dangerous person. Its scarlet eyes stared greedily at the prey in front of it, saliva dripping down from its teeth. The moment Hellion Vivian fell to the ground, she felt that there was something behind her. Ignoring the pain in her arm, she immediately rolled and looked toward the shadow. Chapter 764. In the middle of the densely packed spider web, a giant poisonous spider was lying there eerily. Its whole body was covered in gray hair and it was almost the size of 4 adults. There were 2 small eyes on its head, and its 8 legs were half bent, ready to attack the food in front of it at any time. Its body was oblong and the front half was its head and chest while the back half was its chubby belly. Its 4 pairs of legs were running quickly towards Hellion Vivian, and its slender red eyes were filled with desire. Hellion Vivian realized that she was not in a tunnel, but a nest built by the spider in front of her. Those who understood spiders knew that once one fell into their nest, no matter how strong one was, one could not escape, especially when the other party was a poisonous spider. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, and one hand pressed on her left shoulder and stood up with difficulty. Her clothes were stained with scarlet, and she could clearly see that the spider was salivating at her. These low-level demons that evolved from animals were not like the high-level demons that were born with magic. They did not have the slightest bit of human gentleness, and even the most important dining etiquette of demons did not exist in them. Just like the poisonous spider, it liked the thrill of tearing its food into pieces. The more mangled the human was, the more it liked it. The venomous spider stuck out its tongue and licked its thin lips. Following its actions, a sinister voice rang in Hellion Wei Wei's ears. I really didn't expect that a pregnant woman would dare to enter the tomb. It has been 500 years and I will not forget this smell. It belongs to the unique smell of a baby. Indeed, meat that has not been born is the most tender and delicious. As the black spider spoke, it walked towards Hellion Vivian. When its feet stepped on the ground, the surrounding spider web would sway. Hellion Vivian felt her ankle tighten and her left leg was trapped. When the silver silk stuck to her leg, she felt excruciating pain. She could even hear the sound of her joints cracking. Damn it! She cursed in her heart. The blood on her forehead flowed to the corner of her eyes, blurring her vision. However, she didn't move. When one was trapped in a spider web, the more one moved, the tighter they would be entangled. It didn't matter if her legs or hands were injured as long as the baby in her belly was not hurt. At the same time, Hellion Vivian was observing her opponent's fatal points. She was a military fire agent. Even if she did not have martial chi, her first reaction when she was in danger was to think about how to get rid of her opponent. However, this time she had to face a spider that was 5 times bigger than her. Furthermore, its entire body was filled with venom. If she was not careful, she would be poisoned. Under such circumstances, Hellion Vivian knew that the most important thing was to stay awake. Poison Spider was still immersed in his own wonderful world. The tip of his tongue licked the blood that Silver Thread had brought over. His demonic red eyes suddenly turned into a thin line. I didn't expect to meet such a rare specimen. Although you don't have any spiritual energy, you're more delicious than the exorcists I've tasted. This is really an unexpected gain. After saying this, Poison Spider's ugly face became unusually excited. A foul smell came out of its nose, and its sharp claws could not help but want to completely disintegrate the human in front of it. Poison Spider let out a crazy and terrifying laugh. However, when it realized that the human in front of it did not show any fear, it raised its guard. Woman, you're indeed one of the smarter humans I've seen. All these years, no one has ever been able to break through the spider web I've set up. You're the first. However, I advise you to give up on your current thoughts and stop struggling. Wei Wei tightly pursed her thin lips. A piercing pain transmitted from her four limbs. Her pale and handsome face was stained with blood, yet she didn't reveal the slightest bit of emotion. Only that pair of clear eyes were dyed red by the blood flowing from her forehead. It was good that she could talk. That way she could buy some time. Hellion Vivian looked at Poison Spider that was slowly walking towards her. Her mind was spinning rapidly. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. I didn't smell you when I was up there and I didn't touch any traps. It's impossible for me to fall down just like that unless there are some hidden traps that we can't see. However, even so, someone has to touch them. At that time we were the only ones in the tunnel. You weren't there. That means you have people among the exorcists? You're really smart. Poison Spider narrowed its eyes. But it's a pity that you humans can't resist temptation. Hee hee, since you're going to die anyway, I don't mind telling you. Among your group of exorcists, there are already people who have been infected with resentment. They can be controlled by demons with just a few words. Other demons can't detect it, but I've been in the graveyard for thousands of years. I'm especially sensitive to such people. Moreover, one of you is no longer alive. Since you're going to die in the end, you might as well be eaten by me. Hellion Vivian did not carefully analyze the meaning of Poison Spider's words. She only wanted to buy some time, so she asked again, if you really want to eat me, wouldn't it be better to appear at the tunnel and eat me directly? Why waste time to bewitch humans? You're hiding like this. Are you afraid? Afraid? Poison Spider laughed mockingly as if he had heard a joke. The man beside you is indeed powerful. But if we really fight, I might not lose to him. It's just that I prefer to be like this, waiting for my prey to fall into my net. If you want to buy some time and wait for that man to come and save you, I advise you to save your breath. From the hole you fell to here, you have to cross the entire ancient tomb. Unless he can break through all the stone walls, otherwise no matter how fast he is, he will need to walk for 6 hours before he can see you. By then I'll have eaten you until there's not even a bone left. Woman, I've already told you, don't try to be smart in front of me. Originally, I have no interest in eating a human like you. You don't have spiritual energy like those exorcists. But now that I think about it, once I peel open your stomach and eat you, it'll be delicious. Saying that, Poison Spider licked its lips again. It was different from other animals. When it licked its lips, it would make the sound of spitting silk. That kind of sound echoed in the empty and dark nest. It was so cold that it made one's scalp numb. If it was someone else who fell in, their legs would have been trembling by now. Hellion Wei Wei, on the other hand, was only thinking of a solution. Under her long sleeves, her right hand was holding an exquisite silver gun. She had been hesitant to shoot at the venomous spider. Firstly, it was because if its venomous blood splashed out, it was very likely that it would endanger her life. Secondly, if she wanted to hit its vital points, she must wait until it was close enough to her. Chapter 765. However, its 8 legs were very difficult to deal with because it was very likely that the black spider would use one leg to block the bullet while the other leg went straight for her lower abdomen when she fired the gun. Hellion Vivian was right. When the black spider's entire body was pressed down, its 8 legs were very agile. It sinisterly held down her broken arm while its remaining 7 legs were used to restrain her arms. Some of them were used to tear at her abdomen. Just as Hellion Vivian was about to shoot, the black spider was blocked by an unknown force. Even 2 of its legs had been forcibly broken. Roar. The black spider let out a low roar that it had never let out before. Countless spider webs shot out from its body. It had never felt such pain before and stopped moving. Its small eyes looked at its broken legs, then at Hellion Vivian's abdomen. It refused to believe that it could not tear at it again. This time the unknown force was even stronger. It directly bounced its entire body back, causing it to fall heavily onto the ground. Even with the protection of the spider web, the fall was not light. Its internal organs were in pain from the shock and its throat was dry and painful. You dare to bully Imperial Mother? Try it again and see how I'll teach you a lesson. The fetus in her stomach had learned how to shout. Its voice was unique and cool and its posture was very charming. Unfortunately, no one could hear it except for the smaller fetus. Big brother, you're so awesome. There was nothing that made the bigger fetus prouder than being praised by the smaller fetus. He puffed out his little chest and said in a cold and arrogant manner, "Don't worry, with Big Brother here, that ugly and smelly black spider can forget about getting close to you and Imperial Mother." The smaller fetus nodded. Although its body was very weak, it still pricked up its little ears and tried its best to listen to the sounds outside, afraid that its Imperial Mother would be hurt. The black spider moved its aching legs and stood up again with great difficulty. How long has it been? How long has it been since it was in such a sorry state? Even if it had encountered a top-notch exorcist, it could have chewed them up effortlessly. What did this woman just do? He actually broke its leg. Everyone knew what a spider's 8 legs meant to it. They were its sharp claws and a necessary tool to weave its web. It was simply unforgivable. The venomous spider's eyes turned red. In its rage, it attacked even more ferociously, but in the end, it was bounced back. Not only that, only 4 of its 8 legs were left. This was the first time the venomous spider had tasted a thorny problem. It was in so much pain that it broke out in cold sweat. Perhaps it was wrong. It was not that woman who had shaken it off. It was her stomach. That's right, her stomach. Black Spider's eyes shook violently. He pointed at Hellion Vivian with one of his legs and said in a trembling voice, What is in your stomach? Was he a monster? No, that's impossible. I clearly smelled the most delicious spiritual energy, so it should still be very weak. How could it be so powerful? Hellion Vivian also realized that the baby in her stomach was not ordinary. She always knew that her baby would not be like a normal human. After all, His Highness genes were too overbearing, so it would definitely be a little devil. However, even Hellion Vivian did not expect that the child would be so good at fighting before it was even born. It had completely defeated the venomous spider. Moreover, Hellion Vivian did not know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the child was specifically aiming for the venomous spider's legs. The venomous spider, which was missing a leg, looked really funny. There was an old saying that went, "No one knows a child better than his mother." The bigger fetus was pointing at the venomous spider coldly for the smaller fetus to see. Look at it, isn't it funny? When we get out, Big Brother will catch a venomous spider for you to play with. Then we will break its legs one by one and make it your toy. The smaller fetus smiled. These 2 children's taste was really like their father's, slightly twisted. At this moment, the venomous spider in the shadows had already realized the problem. It was very smart and quickly knew how to avoid such an attack. As long as it moved closer and spat out silk from a distance, the tenacious spider silk would wrap around the woman tightly until she was strangled to death. Although this method would destroy the most delicious taste of the food, once the mother died, the fetus would also die an hour later. However, the current situation allowed it to do so. Otherwise, it would not have any chance of winning at all. The venomous spider was still afraid because it did not know what kind of fetus would have such a strong demonic aura. That's right, at that moment what was emitted from the woman's stomach was indeed demonic aura. Strange, what it smelled was spiritual energy, so why did it turn into demonic aura when it got closer? The venomous spider did not know that once a high-level demon made a contract with a human, the human's existence would cover up the demonic aura on the demon's body. Whether it was the demon itself or the demon's child, it would be the same. Therefore, until now, the venomous spider had not seen through Beligaju's true form. It was also because of this reason that it did what it regretted the most in its life, which was the idea of killing Hellion Vivian. The venomous spider narrowed its eyes again, and its body bulged backward. It wanted to use a silver thread to directly bind Hellion Vivian's neck. The vigilant Hellion Vivian noticed the venomous spider's action and saw through what it wanted to do at a glance. Just as she was about to raise her foot, there was a rumbling sound. Countless stones rolled down from the left wall and smashed into the venomous spider's 4 feet that were already in pain. Stone dust flew everywhere and the venomous spider's nest collapsed. From the flying stone dust, a slender and tall figure walked out. His entire body exuded a thick evil aura, like an ink-colored fog, making him look very unreal as though he had merged with the darkness. It's him. That man who looks like he is not to be trifled with. Did he really pass through the stone wall? His body was covered in blood and the venomous spider smelled it. It was not human blood but the blood of its descendants. He just stood there, his slender hands wrapped in snow-white gloves, and even his sleeves and collar were exquisite to the point of elegance, making him look like a noble living in the 19th century. He was like a lonely snowflake in 1,000 mountains, arrogant, cold, and appropriate. However, the venomous spider knew that hidden under this appropriateness was an overwhelming murderous aura. Its natural instinct made it give up on attacking Hellion Vivian, and turned to face Beligaju, spitting out the venomous silk. Chapter 766. Venomous Spider knew that at this moment, as long as the man was not prepared, the spider silk it spat out would definitely break his neck. No matter how powerful this man was, he would not be able to escape. As expected, the silver silk wrapped around the man's neck and it was very tight. "Huh. You're not that strong either?" Venomous Spider looked at Beligaju who was bound by it. Its remaining limbs touched the man's face in disdain. It thought that this man would be very difficult to deal with. Seeing how he could punch through a stone wall, it thought that it would take some time to deal with him. It did not expect that although this man's martial arts were powerful, he was a fool. At the very least he was not smart enough. He did not even have time to react before he became its meal. Venomous Spider laughed out loud. Then it narrowed its eyes. "How dare you destroy my place and kill so many of my disciples? There was a path to heaven but you refused to take it. There was no door to hell but you insisted on barging in. Watch how I disembowel you." "Disembowel me?" Facing Venomous Spider's murderous gaze, Beligaju was still smiling. His tone was really like he was chatting with someone. His attitude had never been so amiable before. Hellion Vivian could not bear to look at Venomous Spider anymore. This demon did not know that the Kindera Prince was, the scarier he was when he fought. "Brother, is that spider looking for trouble?" The smaller fetus glanced at the bigger fetus. The bigger fetus looked back at him with incomparable calmness. "Do you know what is the most perverted thing about father?" The smaller fetus shook its head. "I don't know. You're trying to defame father again, aren't you? The more you dislike something, the more he wants you to do it. Or the things you want to do, he wants you to do them to your heart's content." When the bigger fetus said this, it was very disdainful. He only knows how to use such shameless methods. However, that spider is really stupid. How dare it mock father, that demon? The smaller fetus was speechless. At the end of the day, you just want to defame father. So you always defame him. Brother is the first thing you do when you go out to fight father. The black spider did not know that it had offended the person it should not have. It moved its limbs and spat out spider silk again. "Die. As a person, the thing I dislike the most is sticky and dirty things because that makes me very disgusted." When the last word came out of its mouth, the air around Beligaju seemed to be sucked into a vacuum. Something dark suddenly sprang out from the ground under his feet. Venomous Spider did not expect that the spider silk that wrapped around the man would turn into a puddle of water. Such a situation had never happened before. Venomous Spider raised his remaining forelegs and looked at the scene in front of him in horror. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. That man was. Their eyes widened to the maximum. At this moment, everyone's hair stood on end. They had to escape if they did not escape. They could not breathe. If the sound of breathing was heard, they would be killed. The venomous spider did not know why it had such a reaction. If it was a little older or if it was like a high-level demon, it would know that this was the respect demons had for their king. Once you became a demon, the submission and fear would surge out from your blood. "Leave this place. Leave this place." Venomous Spider's mind was filled with this thought. It started to run. However, a tearing pain suddenly attacked it. It let out a shrill roar as it fell heavily to the ground. No one saw what had happened. By the time he felt the pain, he had already been stomped to the ground by that man. That's right, stepped on. Unlike the dirty and smelly shoes of most of the people who came here, the black boot that stepped on it was spotless. There was no flaw in the workmanship and it even gave off an indescribable sandalwood smell. But this was not the main point. The main point was, its weight and size were 5 times that of a normal person. Logically speaking, only a demon that was bigger than it could suppress it with just strength. But this man, he actually stepped on it with 1 foot. Not only that, its ribs seemed to be broken. Do you still want to fight? Then the demon smiled again. Whoosh. Black feathers appeared out of nowhere and fluttered in the air. It was a beautiful sight. A thick black fog spread out. Surrounded by feathers, the unfathomable man walked over. His eyes were filled with an evil white gold color like a cat's eyes. When he narrowed his eyes slightly, they emitted a cold light that made Poison Spider unable to move anymore. When the giant venomous spider saw Bailey Jiaju's pair of golden eyes, it immediately knelt on the ground and trembled as it curled up its body. Its face was filled with unprecedented respect and fear. No more fighting. How could it be him? The one who controlled the darkness and loved to play with people's hearts. Even if it trained for thousands of years, it would still kneel down and worship the king. Why is he here? Heavens, what did I do just now? It actually provoked the most ruthless king. Venomous Spider was filled with regret. However, its regret was of no use to Baligaju. He bent down and placed the Hellion Vivian on its soft feathers. His eyes looked at the trembling venomous spider and a bloodthirsty smile appeared on his face. What should I do? I still want to fight. As he spoke, Baligaju smiled. His fangs bit down on his black gloves and his thin lips softly spat out a string of laughter. His eyes that were filled with golden marks narrowed. Venomous Spider felt its heart twist into a ball. It supported its body and began to kneel down and beg for mercy. King, I didn't know it was you. Please forgive me this time on account that we are both demons. Baligaju seemed to have heard a funny joke. You want me to forgive you? Venomous Spider nodded its huge head. Heh. Baligaju curved his thin lips and grabbed one of its legs. He used force. You hurt my most precious thing and you still expect me to forgive you. Crack. The crisp sound of bones breaking. Baligaju blew on his palm and then threw the huge venomous spider into the air. Then he jumped up and his long robe fluttered. His elegant long legs bent slightly and he kicked venomous spider's 6th leg. She is my most precious thing. How dare you eat her? Even if it was a huge venomous spider, it could not endure such physical and mental torture. It had to be said that His Highness had his own unique views on how to train demons. After a short while, venomous spider was beaten to the point of no return. It would rather die than be tortured like this. It bit its lips and made a whimpering sound. Baligaju smiled again, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only coldness. You said you were just thinking? You didn't dare to do it? Chapter 767. Venomous Spider nodded heavily and looked at Baligaju with tears in its eyes. The bigger fetus snorted and his cool, soft and arrogant voice sounded again. How stupid. Taking revenge is a basic requirement for us as demons. Does this venomous spider not have any common sense? Or does it think that Father will be soft-hearted? What a waste of its eyes. Father is a vengeful person. If he doesn't kill it, he won't stop. The smaller fetus agreed with his older brother on this point. However, the strange thing was that Father stopped moving. Not only that, he even released the force he used to crush venomous spider. He stood there with his long and slender body and smiled gently. Do you like to eat? What is Father doing? Is he going to treat that stupid venomous spider to a meal? The smaller fetus and bigger fetus looked at each other and became more excited. Venomous Spider did not expect the man to ask such a question. It was stunned for a moment before it heaved a sigh of relief. Since the other party was chatting with it, it meant that he was not going to kill it. Venomous Spider tried to suppress the joy that was surging out and nodded again. Venomous Spider could not be blamed for thinking that way. His Highness looked too elegant and approachable. Then eat all of these. Baligaju smiled and raised his chin. He signaled Venomous Spider to look under his feet with his eyes. Venomous Spider was very happy at first. It escaped with its life and now there was something to eat. Although it was not hungry, it was better than dying. However, when it followed the other party's gaze, the joy on its face froze. King, did you make a mistake? Venomous Spider was hopeful as it asked in a trembling voice. Bailey Jaju absent-mindedly tidied up his sleeves, his thin lips held a smile. That's right, these are the things eat. But those are rocks. Venomous Spider could not help but roar. It wanted to cry but had no tears. Hearing that, Baligaju raised his leg again and stomped on Venomous Spider's last leg. The sound of bones breaking was heard and it was painful to hear. However, Baligaju still smiled faintly and raised his eyes. Why? You don't want to eat? Venomous Spider did not dare to question his words anymore. It endured the pain and shouted, I want to eat. I want to eat. If you want to eat, then do it yourself. Do you want me to feed you? Bang. Another kick, but this time his face was flattened. Venomous Spider immediately cried and shook his head. Because his mouth was crushed, even his voice was muffled. I will eat it myself. I will eat it myself. After that, it picked up a relatively small stone with its painful limbs and hesitated for a moment. Baligaju didn't move. He just looked at it with a smile. Poison Spider shut his eyes tightly. Without even looking at it, he swallowed the rock. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think about it to know that swallowing stones would definitely be very uncomfortable. The venomous spider was indeed in a lot of pain, but fortunately its body was relatively large. It wouldn't die from swallowing a rock, but its throat was a little unbearable. Just as it swallowed and thought it was over, Baligaju's gentle voice sounded again. More. If it's not enough, I can still get you a few more pieces. Hearing this, Poison Spider's face instantly turned pale. I am actually not that hungry. Poison Spider struggled. Baligaju had already walked to Hellion Vivian's side. His right hand gently brushed her injured ankle. His eyes were extremely cold, like a sharp diamond flashing in the light. Eat. That one word made Poison Spider spit out a mouthful of blood. It didn't dare to delay, so it buried its head and stuffed the rocks beside it into its mouth. Its teeth were in pain from the cuts. The huge benefits of its body became less and less reliable as more and more rocks entered its mouth. The only thing Poison Spider felt was pain. Its stomach was completely bloated and it was uncomfortable. However, it had to continue eating because the other party's gaze was firmly locked on it. It didn't know what it would face if it stopped. Its esophagus was so full that it couldn't stuff anything into it. The extremely painful feeling of fullness made Poison Spider's tears flow out. If it was asked what it regretted the most in its life, it would be grabbing a pregnant woman in a graveyard, coveting the fetus in the pregnant woman's stomach, and provoking the person it shouldn't have provoked the most. Poison Spider's eating gradually slowed down. It even seemed to have difficulty opening its mouth. The two fetuses in the stomach watched this scene and swallowed their saliva. The two of them finally understood what it meant by, I'll let you do what you want to do as long as you want to do it. This was too much. If the stupid spider continued eating, its stomach would explode. Brother. The smaller fetus nudged the bigger fetus with its head. The bigger fetus stared at it and said in a deep voice, Yes? You better not provoke father when you go out in the future. This time, the smaller fetus used an affirmative sentence as if warning the bigger fetus. He was worried that his older brother wouldn't be able to win against father. The bigger fetus narrowed his big eyes. This old man is indeed more shameless than I thought. The smaller fetus. This is not just shameless anymore. But this is a good idea. When the bigger fetus said this, his voice was especially strong. The smaller fetus, is it really good for you to accept it so quickly? He felt that he had to communicate with his mother and ask her to pay attention to his older brother's prenatal education. What if his older brother went astray? If anyone dares to eat you in the future, I will use this method to deal with them. The bigger fetus reached out and hugged the smaller fetus. He was as arrogant as ever. No one is allowed to bully you. The smaller fetus smiled. Yes. Forget it. What was the point of pranking him? As long as his older brother was happy, it was fine. Moreover, mother had always been teaching them to apply what they had learned. Unable to hear the conversation between the two fetuses, Poison Spider only wanted to die now. It looked at Baligaju's action of protecting Hellion Vivian with tears in its eyes. Before it suddenly understood, it seemed to have understood something. Could it be that this human's baby was the king's? Poison Spider widened its eyes again. Then, it was so full that it wanted to vomit. It vomited acid and its face was extremely pale. However, because there was a stone in its mouth, it could not vomit at all. As if he had seen through its thoughts, Bailey Jiaju walked over and whispered in its ears again, "If you spit it out, eat it again." Poison Spider's mouth was crooked. It endured the pain and swallowed down. It was this last piece that caused blood to bubble up in its throat. It was only one step away from death. Baligaju looked at it and smiled in satisfaction. Then he slowly lowered his voice and it was bone-chilling. "Didn't you say that you were only thinking about it? Then I will tell you now. You can't even think about my prey." Chapter 768. Bang. For the last kick, Baligaju landed on the venomous spider's stomach. He didn't need to use a lot of strength to make the venomous spider suffer a fate worse than death. It only had one breath left. More and more blood bubbles came out of its throat, but it couldn't stop it. Hellion Vivian watched this scene silently. She thought that Mr. Spider must have never thought that he would die from overeating one day. In fact, the process of dying from overeating was quite slow. It was even more painful than death by 1,000 cuts. The venomous spider would hold on to its last breath for a short period of time. Then, it would be a fate worse than death. After dealing with the venomous spider, Baligaju walked back. However, this time there was no smile on his face. When he looked at Hellion Vivian's wound again, countless black feathers fell from behind him. Even the stone under his feet cracked. "If I still couldn't find you, I would crush all the living and dead here." His tone was still the same as before. It was so calm that no one could hear his emotions. However, Hellion Vivian knew that at that moment what he said was his true thoughts. It could be seen from the fact that he broke the stone walls of the ancient tomb. She knew very well that no matter how elegant Baligaju looked, he was actually the darkest and most vicious person in his heart. It was just a matter of which side of him he was willing to show to the world. In front of her, he would even clean up the bloodstains before letting her open her eyes. It was as if he wanted to maintain the perfect image in her heart. It was also as if he didn't do many things because she was around. For example, an eye whose repeated provocations. If it was only His Highness alone. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know how miserable an eye whose death would be. His Highness could even make him feel like the venomous spider. Even death would be a relief. This person was hated since he was young, whether it was his birth mother or his father. It wasn't that she had never seen his childhood situation. It was because she had seen it that she felt pain in her heart. Perhaps this was the feeling of liking someone. Even if he was an executioner who massacred everyone, you would only care if he was anxious when you saw him. Hellion Vivian reached out and hugged His Highness. She said with a smile, "It's okay. I'm fine. You came in time." The man's tall and straight figure paused for a moment, and then he slowly opened his hands. All the hostility turned into gentleness, and he pressed the head in front of him, which always made him lose his sense of propriety, into his arms. His thin lips pursed. "Now you can't please me, but this kind of thing will only happen once." He said the last sentence to himself. The moment Hellion Vivian disappeared, Baligaju finally tasted the feeling of regret described by humans. No matter if he was a human or a demon. He never knew what regret was. Nothing could escape his control. But at that time he regretted. He regretted not holding this idiot's hand all the time. He regretted not taking out this damn spider and crushing it to death in the first place. Baligaju's arms tightened again and his low voice was like quicksand. "I really should lock you up so that you can't go anywhere." "How can that be? I still have to find relics to feed the baby." Hellion Vivian smiled beautifully. After a while she seemed to think of something and her shrewd eyes narrowed. "Why did that spider say that my stomach was full of spiritual energy? Shouldn't it be evil energy? It's so strange." Baligaju raised his eyebrows. "That is to say, you were targeted because of the little ghost in your stomach." Hellion Vivian said, "That's not the point. I said before that the little ghost was a troublemaker before it was born." Baligaju had been dissatisfied with a certain little ghost for a long time. Although it was his child, it didn't affect his dislike of it. When the bigger fetus heard Baligaju's words, he directly protested. "If you want to talk about troublemakers, then father is." The smaller fetus didn't respond to the bigger fetus, but lowered its small head as if thinking about something. The bigger fetus continued with a cold snort. If it weren't for father's affections back then, why would a fake phoenix girl come out and fight with mother for the Saraira? She made the capital city a mess. Not only did she affect mother, but she also infected me with energy. Mother had no choice but to come to the ancient tomb. It's all because of me. The smaller fetus dispiritedly interrupted the bigger fetus. If it wasn't for me, mother wouldn't have lost the spirit energy and martial chi in her body. I've thought about this. The food that Big Brother ate was caught from outside. Only I had to constantly absorb spirit energy to maintain my current state. Mother lost her spirit energy when I was born. The poisonous spider targeted mother because of the aura emitted from my body. If it wasn't for me, perhaps mother wouldn't have to suffer so much. The bigger fetus didn't say anything at first. It just looked at the smaller fetus calmly. Then it hugged the smaller fetus in its arms and put away its usual arrogance, leaving only softness. If what you said is true, then I shouldn't exist. I'm mother's nemesis. Now that I'm in her stomach, I've attracted a lot of energy. When I'm born, I might even lose my mind and reach my claws for mother. Whenever I think of that scene, I feel that it's better to just stay in mother's stomach like this or just not exist at all. At least this way mother won't be in danger. No, Big Brother has to be here. The smaller fetus leaned its head over again. Big Brother is so useful. He can protect mother at critical times. The bigger fetus didn't say anything else. The smaller fetus also stopped talking. The two of them hugged each other for warmth, but they couldn't resist the thoughts in their hearts. As if she sensed the movement in her stomach, Hellion Vivian reached out and caressed her lower abdomen. Her movements were gentler than before. She looked at Baligaju and said in a clear voice, "He's not trouble. He's the person I love the most besides you." Bailey Jiaju was not prepared to be confessed to out of the blue. He reached out and covered Hellion Wei Wei's eyes with his hands. Then he kissed her and pressed his lips against hers. Even his breath was warm. Hellion Vivian sniffed the familiar mint scent and nestled in his arms, allowing him to check her wound. Her fingers were weak, but she didn't forget about the important matter. "You've always thought that the baby is a demon, right?" "Yes." Baligaju looked at Hellion Vivian's bleeding ankle with heavy eyes, thinking about something. Hellion Vivian frowned. "But the poisonous spider thinks that the baby in my stomach is very spiritual. Its sense of smell won't be wrong unless..." Chapter 769. Hellion Vivian's eyes suddenly lit up. Her long legs, which were originally in a daze, suddenly bent forward. There was a rare excitement on her face. "I have 2 babies in my belly. That's right. It must be so." Hellion Wei Wei looked at Bailey Jiaju with a smile in her eyes. "Because the demonic nature of one of them is too strong as a father, it's easy for you to not sense the other baby's aura. However, the other magical creatures can't sense the demonic nature of the other baby. Since he's in my body, he can successfully conceal his aura. Under such circumstances, the other baby's weak spiritual aura will seep out and be detected by the other magical creatures. When we came to the ancient tomb, the magical creature in the sea waterfall was also targeting me. Although it was scared away by you before it could get close to me, but if you think about it carefully, even if it wanted to eat someone, it should have targeted Jugayun, who has spiritual aura. Now it seems that it must be because of the babies." Hellion Vivian's eyes became brighter as she spoke. She reached out and stroked her lower abdomen. When it came to the topic of children, she would speak with a gentleness that encompassed all things in the world. At this time, if Senior Lee was here, he would definitely feel familiar. Unfortunately, Senior Lee was not here. Hellion Vivian only talked to Baligaju endlessly. "There are 2 babies, but the palace only made a pair of tiger head shoes and a set of clothes. Imperial Grandfather also ordered the palace to make a small dragon bed. Now it seems that we need to add another set. Also, those small bowls and chopsticks are made in the style of boys. Previously you said that one of them is a boy. I don't know if the other one is a boy or a girl. If it is a girl, then we have to make it according to the princess's style. I always feel that there are a lot of things to do when we go back. I don't know if the 2 little buns will fight when they are placed together, or will one hug the other. When the time comes, let them carry small school bags to the White Academy together. That will definitely be very cute." After hearing Hellion Vivian's words, the smaller fetus was stunned for a moment. His heart that was originally filled with self-blame gradually warmed up. He looked at the bigger fetus blankly and cutely and said, "Mother knows me. Brother, mother knows me." Yes. The bigger fetus lowered his head and imitated how his mother stroked them. He stroked the smaller fetus head and said, "Furthermore, mother likes you very much. Look at how happy mother is." Of course, the small fetus saw it. He turned his big eyes and said gently and seriously, "Big brother, we have to go out together. We can't let mother be disappointed and sad." "Okay," the bigger fetus said coolly as he hugged the bigger fetus. He was now half a head taller than the small fetus. Originally, there were only two small silhouettes and they couldn't even be called a child. However, because the bigger fetus expression looked like a small adult, when he held the smaller fetus, he didn't have the hostility he had when he grabbed the dead spirit. He looked like a good older brother and even knew to lower his head to kiss the head of the smaller fetus. The picture was indescribably warm and cute. Baligaju was also stunned. He did not expect that there would be two babies. In other words, other than Imp, there was another human. A human like Vivian? Baligaju's eyes darkened. When his fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's leg, he suddenly pressed his body down. This time he did not kiss Hellion Vivian's lips. Instead, his lips fell on her injured ankle and the tip of his tongue licked the blood on it. If the other baby was a human, then they would have to speed up. He was a demon and he understood the nature of demons better than anyone else. Sometimes, even if they were unwilling, the existence of demons was to rob. When the day came that they needed more nutrients to sustain themselves, they would make a move on the other baby. This had never happened before. One was a demon and the other was a human. It was like locking a wolf and a sheep together. One day the sheep would become the wolf's food. This was a cruel way of saying it. But this was a demon. He exuded viciousness and selfishness from his bones. No matter how glamorous his appearance was, it could not change this. Just like how he clearly knew that the woman in front of him did not belong to this world. After a long time she was destined to be punished by the heavens. But he still forced her to stay by his side. He did not even want to let a second person see her. Baligaju laughed self-deprecatingly. What a crazy possessiveness. Perhaps his mother in the human world was right. He was deformed. But so what? Even if he changed his life and dyed the world with blood, she had to stay by his side. In this regard he was a little similar to the exorcist guardian. However, in this life he was the one who found her first. And that guardian had mistakenly thought that the other person was her reincarnation. Baligaju did not know what happened when they were gods together. After falling from the sky, his bloodline had turned black. He looked down on gods and demons. All living beings were no different in front of him. Only she, Hellion Vivian, was the only one he wanted. He did not care if what those old men said was true. Even if the person she liked at that time was not him. But now the person who had her was him. The moment the blood entered his throat, Baligaju's eyes turned red. Hellion Vivian did not know what Baligaju was thinking. She only felt that the place where she was kissed was a little numb. She wanted to retract her leg. "Hey, what are you doing? Don't you think the blood is dirty?" "It's not dirty. It's very sweet." When Baligaju raised his head, the tip of his tongue licked his thin lips. The peach blossom eyes under his black hair flashed with a bewitching smile. He was so handsome that he could make any girl's heart flutter. "But it needs to be disinfected." As he said that, he clenched his fingers and his black nails dug into his palm. Bright red blood dripped from his palm onto her wound, drop by drop. Not only did Hellion Vivian freeze, but the two fetuses in her stomach also froze. They all knew that as a demon, especially a high-level demon, the most harmful thing to do was to make them bleed dry. Because for a demon, blood meant the formation of a contract and it also meant eternal submission. That was why every drop of a demon's blood was especially precious. It could bring people back from the dead and it could also heal wounds quickly. But at the same time, a demon would bear the pain for the victim. Hellion Weiwei's eyes stared blankly at the handsome face in front of her, which was always perfect and impeccable at any time. Did he mean to completely hand himself over to her in the future? When they made the contract, it was only from then on that her soul would belong to him. This was the most cunning part of a demon. Even if it was a life and death contract, the beneficiary would always be the demon. Not all demons were willing to submit to humans. But now he had added a new weight to the contract. Chapter 770. Why are you looking at me like that? Beligaju's voice faded. His lips were pale and he was about to retract his hand. Hellion Vivian's first reaction was to grab his hand. She tore her clothes and bandaged his hand. After she was done, she said softly, "Don't worry, I will be responsible for you for the rest of your life." The two little ones in her stomach were speechless. Weren't these lines supposed to be said by men? Why did mother say it so naturally? Awkward. On the contrary, Bailey Jiaju was very calm and unruffled. "This is what you said. My heart is more fragile, so you better do as you say, understand?" When Poison Spider heard this, he almost choked on his last gasp of air. A fragile heart. The weak heart is clearly here. On the contrary, Wei Wei earnestly nodded her head, appearing as if she had personally experienced what he said. The bigger fetus was angry. Father is really shameless. He even thought of a way to spill blood. But it can't be considered as a win. If he submits to humans, he will do whatever mother wants him to do. The real beneficiary is mother. The little fetus smiled. In the past, he had always felt that his father was very fickle because he could see that his father was not looking forward to the birth of him and his older brother. He did not even look forward to the birth of his own flesh and blood. This was probably the common trait of all demons, especially his father who had lived for so long. But now he suddenly understood that his father was not fickle. He had given the last bit of gentleness in his life to his mother. Otherwise, as a high-level demon, he would never submit to a human, especially a demon king, which was even more so. It seemed like brother didn't have to worry about a vixen seducing father anymore. In some ways, father was the one who was tied up. Beligaju obviously knew this, but he didn't seem to care. After the wound on Hellion Vivian's ankle healed, he immediately returned to his usual noble and cold self. He bent his slender waist slightly and said in a commanding tone, "Come on, I will carry you. It will be faster to walk." Hellion Vivian smiled and pounced on him. She rubbed her face against his back and asked comfortably, "I'm still curious whether the other baby is a boy or a girl." Beligaju fixed her long legs and said in a warning tone, "It doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl as long as you don't come out like that little brat when you shouldn't. Aren't you a little too strict with the babies?" Hellion Vivian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Bailey Jiaju leisurely replied, "This highness is thinking of them, lest they end up with the same fate as that stupid spider." Hellion Vivian, it would have been better if his highness hadn't mentioned spiders, but the moment he did she couldn't help but look back. The spider was not completely dead yet, but it was on the verge of death. The shape of its stomach was slightly distorted by the stones. Originally, when Hellion Vivian was searching for the soul fragments, she didn't find that a certain highness had the habit of feeding the divine beast vegetables. Now that she saw the spider, she knew that what the fire Qilin said before was true. It wasn't an exaggeration at all. Compared to letting people eat until they died, it was not an exaggeration to feed a carnivorous divine beast vegetables. Hellion Vivian fell into deep thought as she felt the wind blowing past her ears. Even though Beligaju didn't tell her about the fetus, the smart Hellion Vivian still thought about it. She wasn't worried when she had one baby. But now she had two babies. One was a demon and the other was a human. When normal twins were in the mother's womb, one would always steal the other's nutrients. This was the rule of survival. Moreover, now that it was a demon and a human, the situation would definitely be worse. There was no time. She had to reach the main coffin before the Ni family. The two people who were so focused on obtaining the Saraira didn't know that at this time, someone would accidentally step into this place. That person was Ni Biao. He originally thought that the journey to the main coffin would be smooth as long as he followed the spider's instructions. However, he didn't know why, but the deeper he went, the more he felt that someone was calling his name. When he finally reacted, he had already killed the people in his team. He didn't know where the rest of them went. It turned out that he had been separated from the rest of the team. However, Ni Biao didn't understand why he was hallucinating. It was as if someone ordered him to kill those people. Was there a mistake? He was the best exorcist in the world. He was invulnerable to ghosts. Who could order him around? The conceited Ni Biao had long forgotten that the reason he knew where the mechanism was because a demon told him. In the beginning, when Ni Biao entered the spider's nest, he didn't have much of a reaction. However, when he saw the huge shadow in front of him, he was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He couldn't retreat or advance. The poisonous spider also recognized Ni Biao. It gasped for breath and narrowed its eyes. "It's you?" Only then did Ni Biao see its current state. He wasn't afraid anymore. He sneered at the poisonous spider. "Evil creature, die." Ni Biao's spell was still effective against a dying demon. The light from the peachwood sword split into 3 and pierced the poisonous spider's body one by one. It was easy to see through Ni Biao's plan. If he could bring back one of the black spider's limbs when he returned to the team, not only would the Ni family regain their lost reputation, it would also increase his chances of winning the competition. Most importantly, his reputation among the exorcists would only continue to grow. The poisonous spider never thought that he would die in the hands of such a greedy villain. He didn't want to die at all. He tried his best to fight back. However, it was obvious that he had reached his limit. He only spat out a silver thread which hurt Ni Biao's flesh. Then he collapsed heavily behind him. Ni Biao was in so much pain that his head hurt. The spider's silk was poisonous. Although it only grazed his arm when blood flowed out, it was as if he was scalded. He snorted at the spider again. He raised the sword in his hand and chopped off one of its limbs. At this time he coincidentally saw the exposed magical pill of the spider after its death. The voice in his mind started again. It sounded very familiar, but at that moment, Ni Biao couldn't remember who it was. "Eat the magical pill and you will become a more powerful exorcist." No. Ni Biao shook his head and retracted his hand. It was recorded in the Book of Exorcism that all exorcists are not allowed to consume magical pills. This is a forbidden spell. Chapter 771. Taoist books are also written by humans. When the time comes for you to rule the entire exorcist demon world, you'll be the one to decide on the forbidden curses. The bewitching voice rang again. Ni Biao could not escape no matter how hard he tried. It was as if the voice came from the bottom of his heart. That's right, history had always been like this. The winner would be the king. As long as he stood at the peak of power, he would still have the final say. Ni Biao reached out his hand again. When he touched the magical pill, a resentful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You're right, my daughter." When his heart turned completely black, Ni Biao finally remembered who the voice belonged to. When the magical pill entered his stomach, the scarlet color that symbolized Yin energy flashed across his eyes. What followed was a series of creepy smiles. "It's time to return to the team." Ni Biao stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. He looked like a reptile spitting out its tongue. At this time, the people who were about to reach the main coffin did not realize that they had fallen into a trap from the moment they set off. Now the trap had finally surfaced. Hellion Vivian felt uneasy as she walked. She did not know what she was feeling uneasy about. Maybe it was because she had not figured out what was wrong with the spiritual aura in the exorcist city. Or maybe it was because of the baby in her stomach. She always felt that she had neglected something. And this point was confirmed when she and Bailey Jiaju re-encountered the large army. Zhuge Yun was lucky. The place where he fell was a place he had been before. He encountered a spider web once and used Hellion Vivian's method to break the web. Soon he caught up with the rest of the team who were resting. However, when he saw that Hellion Vivian and Baligaju were not there, he anxiously walked here and there. He wanted to call others to help him rescue them. Unfortunately, even if there were 2 or 3 people who wanted to go, they did not know where Baligaju and Hellion Vivian would fall. The ancient tomb's terrain was intricate and complicated. Elder Lee's advice was that it was best to wait in place. If the person came back after 2 hours, then everything would be fine. If he didn't come back, then the result would be obvious. Zhuge Yun was grabbing his hair in regret when he saw Baligaju walking over with Hellion Vivian on his back. He was overjoyed, even though he felt that the 2 of them were in an ambiguous position. But at this time, Zhuge Yun did not care whether the other party was gay or not. As long as these 2 people were alive, that was better than anything else. After listening to Zhuge Yun's words, Hellion Wei Wei realized that not everyone had fallen into the abyss. That was in line with what she had thought before. Before this, the venomous spider did have a spy. Hellion Vivian's eyes swept across the Ni family who were sitting far away. It was obvious that the Ni family had more teams than any other team. As for the rest, each family had their own team. What a coincidence. However, in the eyes of Hellion Vivian, who had studied law, any coincidences were not so ordinary. Compared to the difficulties of the other teams, none of the Ni family members had fallen. This could only mean one thing, and that was that the spy was in the Ni family's team. As for who this person was, Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. She remembered that the person leading the Ni family was Ni Biao. She did not notice at that time as she only wanted to move forward. Now that she thought about it, Ni Biao's usual practice was to let the disciples take the lead to test whether there was any danger in front. But this time he unexpectedly took the lead and walked in front. He was not leading the way, but to prevent the Ni family members from falling when he activated the mechanism. Hellion Vivian's brain worked quickly, and her memory seemed to be able to cycle. The venomous spider had said, "Among your group of exorcists, one of them has already been tainted with resentment, and would be controlled by a demon with just a few words. Other demons would not be able to detect it, but I have been in the tomb for thousands of years, so I am especially sensitive to such people. Moreover, one of you is no longer a living person. Since you will all die in the end, you might as well be eaten by me." In other words, Ni Biao had already been tainted with resentment before he entered the tomb. Otherwise, the venomous spider would not have been able to control him. It was impossible for a top exorcist to be bewitched with just a few words. What did the last sentence mean? One of you is no longer a living person? Hellion Vivian did not pay attention at that time, and thought that the venomous spider was referring to one person. Now that she thought about it, there were actually two clues. The one who was controlled by the demon was Ni Biao. However, the other person who was no longer a living person was definitely not Ni Biao. In other words, there was always a fatal danger in their group that she had not discovered. Hellion Vivian's eyes suddenly narrowed, and then she seemed to have thought of something. She pulled Zhuge Yun over and whispered, "You said before that you saw a corpse in the Ni family?" "Yes." Zhuge Yun frowned as if he had recalled a bad memory. Yes, there were a lot of corpses, and those corpses were all piled up in one place. They did not look dead at all, and their skin was as good as a living person's. However, they were indeed dead and had been dead for a long time. I was so scared that I covered my mouth and ran to the front yard. When I ran out, I met Uncle Anai. He did not look well at that time and said that there was a demon inside that could not be released. However, he was almost done with it and told me not to go to the backyard in the future and not to tell anyone. He even locked the door of the courtyard, and when he saw Father again, he was much more normal. Hellion Vivian sneered. He was lying. If there was a demon inside, why didn't he unite all the exorcists to eradicate it? Instead, he did not want anyone to know about it. Piles of corpses, dead for a long time but still in their original state, were they zombies? No, Zhuge Yun said seriously. It was because they were not zombies that I was scared at that time. Zombies can be dealt with using Chinese talismans, but those corpses seemed to have been preserved by someone. They were so fresh that it was a little scary. Zhuge Yun did not know why he used the word fresh, but strangely this was the only word he could think of. Fresh corpses. No one would believe these words. Hellion Vivian fell into deep thought. A dignified exorcist family would not leave piles of corpses at home. It would only make the house uneasy. Unless they had a reason to do so. Oh right, there's one more thing. Zhuge Yun frowned. Those corpses were just beside Ni Feng's courtyard. Uncle Anai, aren't you worried? Ni Feng? Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. Was Ni Feng very weak when she was young? Chapter 772. How did you know, Brother Wei? Zhuge Yun's eyes lit up, his admiration for Wei Yi increased by another level. Hellion Vivian smiled. You said that she was not in good health and had been in seclusion for a long time. She only came out recently. Yes, but I never said that she was not in good health when she was young. Zhuge Yun muttered to himself, then continued. But before Ni Feng grew up, she was indeed a little too weak. Uncle and I never let her out. There was once when Ni who cried and told me that his sister was dying. And I who told you that personally? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. Zhuge Yun nodded. Yes, although my relationship with that guy is not good now, we used to play together when we were young. I remember that Ni who had a huge reaction at that time, and the whole Ni family was in a bad mood. I heard that even Ni Feng's coffin was ready. Because she was from an exorcist family, she had to be cremated at a designated place after her death. At that time my father had already changed into his exorcist suit. Then the Ni family sent a message saying that Ni Feng had recovered. Hellion Vivian listened quietly, then continued to ask without changing her expression, did this happen after or before you saw the corpse? Of course it was before. I was too young at that time and had not learned any spells yet, so my memory was vague. I only knew that the Phoenix's premature death could not be known to the people of the exorcist city, so the Ni family kept the news very tight. They said that they would only tell everyone when she was truly dead. However, what affected me the most was the words that Ni who said to me while crying. It was as if he was certain that his sister would die. He was trembling all the time. I didn't expect Ni Feng to survive. It's a miracle. No, this is not a miracle at all. Hellion Vivian lowered her voice and lowered her eyes. Someone used a forbidden spell that should not have been used. Zhuge Yun's eyes widened. If it was not for Hellion Vivian giving him a look in time, he would have screamed out loud. Forbidden spell? What forbidden spell? Zhuge Yun tried his best to suppress his emotions. Even his volume was very low, but it still couldn't hide the obvious shock in his tone. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a faint gaze. Corpses, those corpses definitely wouldn't appear in the Ni family for no reason. They definitely have their uses. For example, using corpses to nurture corpses. As long as there is enough flesh and blood from corpses, the corpses can be as fresh as the living. Furthermore, the one being nurtured wouldn't even be discovered by the Reapers that her lifespan has come to an end, because the other corpses have become her best disguise. Brother Wei, you mean Ni Feng she? Zhuge Yun didn't dare to think about his guess. Hellion Vivian was as calm as ever. Ni Feng should have died long ago. She's just a relatively fresh corpse now. That's impossible. If she's a corpse, where did her spiritual energy come from? Zhuge Yun knew that this was no small matter, and his first reaction was to deny it. Hellion Vivian looks back slowly. How can you be so sure that she has Reiki? Zhuge Yun paused. How can you be sure about Reiki? This is something that everyone can see. Hellion Vivian looked at him and said calmly, I remember that the exorcism book once mentioned that the accumulated corpse aura will also form a spirit, because the corpse itself is the last spirit of a human. If it's rich enough, it can also form the so-called Reiki. But this doesn't mean that Ni Feng is a corpse. Zhuge Yun touched his cold arms and felt an unprecedented chill from the bottom of his heart. Instinctively, he didn't want to accept this fact. However, Hellion Wei's tone was flat as she shattered his fantasy. A person who is full of spiritual aura will feel refreshed when you're near her. Do you feel refreshed all the way here? That's because we're in the cemetery. Zhuge Yun was still struggling. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. Look at Ni who. When Zhuge Yun heard Hellion Vivian's words, he really looked at Ni who. It's said that children raised in places with rich Reiki are not bad. Since you have a good relationship with Ni who and both of you were born in an exorcist family, if the aura on his sister is really Reiki, do you think he would end up like this? He's a moron and a chinibyu. Not only did he not learn exorcism, but he's also very insidious. At this point, Hellion Wei paused and continued, not only that, look at the faces of the other members of the Ni family. Every one of them is in a bad mood. This is not the attitude that an exorcist family should have. Previously, I also thought that it was because of the cemetery, but if that's the case, why are you fine? Why are Yiling and the others fine? At that moment, Zhuge Yun knew that what the person in front of him said was true. It was because it was true. That was why he found it hard to accept. They worshipped a corpse as the Phoenix Girl for more than 10 years. Not only did this corpse not reveal any flaws, but she was also loved and respected by the entire demon world. For some reason, Zhuge Yun felt that what laid before him was not just a corpse. It was a huge conspiracy. It was so deep that he did not know what the other party wanted to do. If Brother Wei did not mention this matter, he was afraid that he would never know about it. Not only him but the entire exorcist city was kept in the dark. The entire exorcist tribe was invaded by Reiki. Did that not mean that the whole world would fall into the hands of demons? This was because ordinary humans couldn't tell the difference at all. Once something happened, all the royal families in the entire divine land would unite and send a notice to the exorcist city, asking them to exorcise the demons. This was a long-standing rule. But now, what is the Ni family trying to do? Don't they know the consequences of doing this? Zhuge Yun clenched his hands. He really did not dare to think about it. Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. Most of the people in the Ni family probably don't know about this because it seems like Ni who doesn't know about it. If even Ni who doesn't know about such a secret, it means that only the person who did it, such as Ni Biao, knows about it. However, no matter what his original intention was, it is obvious that the current situation is beyond his control. What do you mean? Zhuge Yun did not understand the last sentence. Hellion Vivian looked up at him. You came back earlier than us. Didn't you notice that Ni Biao is not here? Zhuge Yun was stunned. He did not notice that. He was so worried about the safety of the two people in front of him that he did not notice anything. Chapter 773. While we were talking, the two exorcists sitting on the left were chatting. They were talking about Ni Biao's disappearance. They said that they did not know what happened to him. Ni Biao seemed to be bewitched by something and walked away from the group. Hellion Vivian slowly shared the information she had just gathered. Zhuge Yun's jaw dropped. You can still hear other people's conversations when we're talking? Multitasking is a basic skill that a good observer must have. Hellion Wei absent-mindedly raised her head and looked at the figure that appeared at the entrance of the cave. Her eyes narrowed as she said, I'll hand over the investigation and observation to you another day. First, we need to figure out how each and every one of them who were obviously already bewitched returned safely. Zhuge Yun followed Hellion Wei's gaze and looked over. His brows suddenly furrowed into a ball. The figure that came out of the cave was none other than Ni Biao, who had just swallowed the magical pill. He was still holding a section of the spider's leg in his hand. His eyes were looking at everyone, and he seemed to be in better spirits than when he was possessed. Father. Ni who did not expect his father to come back. He immediately jumped up and his face was full of joy. The disciples of the Ni family were also sincerely happy for Ni Biao's appearance. After all, they thought that their master would never come back. They did not expect a miracle to happen. Unlike the other disciples, Elderly was still cautious. Wait a moment, don't go over yet. Something was wrong with old Master Ni when he left. None of us can guarantee that he's still in his right state of mind. Hearing old Li's words, Ni Biao smiled. He raised the spider's leg in his hand and said, Old Li, don't worry. I'm very conscious now. Not only that, when I came back I also destroyed the magic spider's nest. The magic spider that caused us so much trouble is now dead. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Really? When the other exorcists heard this, their eyes lit up and they surrounded Ni Biao. They could not help but exclaim in surprise, it's really the spider's leg, and this is definitely only a part of the spider's leg. Heavens, you actually killed that poison spider by yourself. Look at its limbs, its body is at least the size of 4 people and its spider silk is so scary. If it were me, I definitely wouldn't be able to deal with it. It's not just you. I think that even if 3 or 4 of us work together, we might not be able to subdue this poisonous creature. Grandmaster Ni is still the best. I won't be able to achieve such a high level of exorcism in my entire life. Ni Biao enjoyed the compliments around him, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Sure enough, his decision was correct. Other than bringing back the spider's limbs, he had also done the right thing, which was to swallow the spider's magical pill. Otherwise, he would not have been able to locate the main group in such a short time. The spider's magic core had a natural positioning system, which made him like a fish in water in the ancient tomb. Those spider webs were no longer of any use to him. He could go wherever he wanted. Not only that, but he could also regain the love and respect of the exorcist. Once he obtained the Saraira, the entire exorcist city would belong to the Ni family. However, before Ni Biao could finish his beautiful dream, a clear and cold voice came from the crowd. Are you sure you killed the poisonous spider? And I Biao followed the voice and looked over. When he saw Hellion Vivian, who was still alive, his pupils shook and then he squinted again. I brought the evidence, what do you think? What do I think? Hellion Vivian smiled and walked over, her eyes shining. I think when you passed by the spider's nest, the spider was already dead. You just took advantage of it and wanted to take credit for it. Hearing this, there was an uproar in the ancient tomb. And I Biao's expression suddenly turned ugly. And I who sneered, what's going on? Brother Wei, are you jealous of my father? That's such a big poisonous spider. Other than my father, who else here can subdue it? Of course there is. Hellion Wei's voice was very calm. When the poisonous spider was still alive, it was going to eat me. It was my friend who appeared and saved me. At the same time, she removed all 8 of the spider's legs. When we left, the spider was still alive. When Ni Biao heard this, he laughed. Hee little brother Wei, your ability to make up stories is quite strong. If you really want this credit, this old man can give it to you. Why do you have to frame this old man? When the exorcists heard Ni Biao's honest words, they did not doubt him and frowned at Hellion Vivian. However, after the previous incident, many exorcists would not jump to conclusions blindly. Only the disciple of the Ni family snorted, Master, why do you care about him? Everyone knows that other than you, there is no one else who can subdue the poisonous spider. No matter what he says, you are the one who walked out with the spider's legs, not him. Hellion Vivian was not interested in explaining to them one by one. The most important thing now was to get the Saraira. However, she could not expose the Ni family's true colors if she started a fight right away. It would not be peaceful when she walked over. Not only did he take the spider's legs, he also ate the spider's magical pill. Beligaju's voice rang in her ears. His unique elegance had a hint of mockery in it. Can an exorcist still be considered an exorcist after eating the magical pill? Everyone turned to look at him when he said that. It was not only because of the content of his words, but also because this man had not spoken much since entering the tomb. No one expected him to say such shocking news. If His Highness did not mention it, Hellion Vivian would not have thought that Ni Biao would eat the magical pill. Only the Demon King could see the magical pill. At this moment, there was a qualitative change in the eyes of the exorcists. Even their eyes were shaking. Magical pill? How is that possible? That was a forbidden spell that was set by the ancestors. Exorcists could eat magical pills and capture holy objects. However, they could never touch the magical pill. Once they touched it, they would be invaded by evil energy. Although their magical power was boundless, they would become neither human nor ghost. Nonsense. And I who looked around and shouted at Beligaju, why would my father eat the magical pill? With his reputation and magical power, he doesn't need to eat that kind of thing. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What if he was already haunted by resentment before this? None of the exorcists here are haunted by resentment. How could my father be haunted by resentment? And I who sneered, this is getting more and more ridiculous. Chapter 774. You think it's ridiculous? Hellion Vivian's voice was faint, but she got straight to the point. Then how do you explain why your father lost his mind before he disappeared? And I whose throat seemed to be blocked in an instant, and his expression turned ugly. He really could not find any excuse to explain his father's reaction. And I Biao's fingertips were also dyed black, but he was still trying his best to suppress it. At this time he could not let anyone find out. Before he obtained the Saraira, he had to be the revered master exorcist of the generation. The people looked at the father and son of the Ni family, and their eyes were already filled with their own guesses. It was at this moment that Ni Feng, who was wearing a white veil, spoke up. Her voice was as gentle as ever, but this time it was more targeted. Young Master Wei, when you're talking about my father, shouldn't you first explain why your companion could not only force the corpse puppet to retreat, but also cut through the wall? Such behavior makes it hard for people to believe that he's an ordinary human being. That's right. From the moment he entered the tomb until now, this Master Jew's behavior is indeed not like an ordinary human. Also, his movements are too fast. He flew out in the blink of an eye. The voices of guesses were like a tide rushing towards them. Zhuge Yun explained anxiously, what's so strange about that? Brother Ju is very powerful. His martial chi is enough to resist our spiritual energy, isn't it? Brother Yun, although you said so, you can't be sure, right? An Feng said with a smile, her voice leisurely. I heard that on the day they appeared they went straight to your Zhuge mansion without any identity verification. Whether they are exorcists or not is still to be verified, isn't it? An Feng was indeed smart. The identity verification of an exorcist was not like other things that could be obtained as one wished. On the way here His Highness did throw 2 exorcist certificates to Hellion Vivian, but those 2 certificates were snatched. His Highness used a more elegant word, borrowed. But when His Highness was beating people up, she would lean against the window and watch, including the 2 exorcists crying and saying that they would never step into the exorcist city again. It was really cool. Hellion Vivian erased the image in her mind and walked over. Miss Anai, do you think that checking our exorcism certificates is more important than whether your father has taken the magic pill? Of course, the 2 couldn't be compared. Even those without an exorcism certificate could enter the graveyard, although they would be condemned. However, for an exorcist to swallow a demonic pill was against the laws of nature. An Feng narrowed her eyes under the veil. An Biao laughed. Since both of us are suspected, why don't we prove it to each other? How do you prove it? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. Since An Biao had swallowed the magical pill, he did not take the other party seriously. He maintained his gentle and hypocritical smile. You suspect that I have swallowed the magical pill, but your companion is even more suspicious. Is he even human? Why don't we have a match and see who will be beaten back to their original form? Sure. Without waiting for Hellion Wei Wei's reply, Bailey Jiaju, who was standing behind her, slowly walked out. Not sure if it was because of the dim light, but his pair of pupils were clearly as black as ink. Yet it made people feel as if there was gold swirling inside. At this moment his smile was brighter than ever. The brilliance in his eyes made him look even more handsome. Perhaps no one understood why he was so happy. However, Hellion Vivian understood that His Highness finally had a legitimate reason to attack. He did not have to deliberately suppress himself and could unilaterally beat someone. Of course he would be happy. She even suspected that His Highness had revealed that An Biao had swallowed the magical pill in order to lead to the current situation. After all, His Highness would only tell her this in the past, and then ask her to exchange something for it. For example, she would take the initiative to kiss him or something like that. For him to say it in public like this, of course, it was to achieve a certain effect. However, An Biao did not take it seriously. When he looked at the other party, his face was full of confidence. He was the best exorcist in the world. His spells were superb and his spiritual energy was extraordinary. Originally, there were not many people in this world who could be his opponent. Now that he had the magical pill in his body, of course his cultivation had broken through another level. In other words, in addition to his own abilities, he had also gained the magical power of a 1,000-year-old spider. Even if the young man in front of him had some skills, he would not be his opponent. Sooner or later he would beat the other party to the ground. By then, even if the other party was a human, he could still do something. After all, he now had the magical pill. As long as the spider silk penetrated the other party's brain, the man in front of him would become a spider. Of course, he did not think that this man would be an ordinary human. When he broke through the stone wall, An Biao was sure that the other party would be a monster in human form. No matter how powerful a monster was, it would not be able to defeat him in demon form. Moreover, he had the exorcism spell to cover his body so no one would see through his demonic nature. When the time came, not only would the suspicion on him be removed, but he would also get rid of a big problem. No matter how An Biao thought about it, he felt that it was a good deal. In the past, Zhuge Yun did not understand the reason behind An Biao's actions. However, after listening to Hellion Vivian's analysis, he immediately saw through An Biao's intention. With a slightly childish voice he said stubbornly, An Biao, you are recognized as the #1 exorcist in the exorcist city. Now you have to fight with someone who has cultivated for God knows how many years later than you. Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed by the world? That's true. Master Ni's magical power should be much higher than the other parties. It's more than just a lot more powerful. You haven't seen the scene of Master Ni capturing demons. When we passed by the forest on our way here, he even subdued a 2-meter-long snake demon. That spell was really powerful. Then this competition is indeed a little unfair. And Biao did not want to see the duck that was already in his mouth fly away. Before an iPhone could give him an order, he smiled at Zhuge Yun. Nephew, this is a special time. If we don't do this, no one will be able to tell who is the one being wronged, right? Or do you know something and don't want this young Master Jew to accept the challenge? Zhuge Yun bit his thin lips and looked at Hellion Vivian. He thought to himself, why is Brother Wei not saying anything this time? Hurry up and stop him. Is he really going to let Brother Jew take the risk? Hellion Vivian saw that the child was looking at her and raised her eyebrows in confusion. On the other hand, Zhuge Yun was still anxiously exchanging glances. On the other hand, Beligaju had already bitten off the gloves on his hands. His smile deepened and he said in a low voice, let's start. Chapter 775. Under the illumination of the torch, the blood-stained green and white robes made Beligaju look taller, more handsome and fair. He looked more demonic and dangerous. Perhaps it was wrong to have such an illusion at this time, but Zhuge Yun did notice traces of evil on his companion at that moment. Hopefully he was overthinking it. In fact, even if the other party was not human, he did not wish for them to die. Zhuge Yun did not wish for any harm to come to them. If it were not for them, he would not have been able to reach the ancient tomb. Even the other exorcists would not have been able to reach this place. Just the spider web alone would have killed many people. It was Brother Wei and Brother Ju who stopped this from happening. As for the real problem, the one with evil intentions was from the Ni family. And now Ni Biao was simply eliminating the obstacle in his eyes. This time Zhuge Yun was really unsure. Ni Biao was his senior. Since young, his magical power and his father were ranked first in the exorcist city. No exorcist had ever defeated them. If Brother Ju was really a demon, he would definitely be beaten back to his original form. Zhuge Yun looked at the scene in front of him worriedly. The other exorcists also felt that this was a battle that they knew the ending before it even started. But as Ni Biao said, if it was not like this, it would be impossible to find out who was lying. Ni Biao had a smile on his face. He wanted to win with one strike. He put his palms together and used his body as a formation to mobilize the demonic core. In addition to the faintly moving spiritual energy, the two peachwood swords on his back flew above his head with an aura that could cut through everything. They formed countless sword rays that lit up the entire ancient tomb. It's the 1,000 returning swords. Oh my God. I never thought that I would be able to see such a profound exorcism technique in my life. The Ni family is really too powerful. Other than Grandmaster Ni, no one else in the world can use this move. I think that little brother on the ground is going to be in trouble. As Zhuge Yun listened to the discussions around him, he became even more nervous. At that moment, even his fingers were stiff. The 1,000 returning swords. Any demon would be tormented by the sword light and reveal their true form under such an exorcism Dao art. Ni Biao was too ruthless. He did not leave any leeway. He could not imagine what would happen to Brother Ju later. He strongly hoped that his opponent was a human. That way he would not lose so miserably. Unlike Zhuge Yun's gloominess, the Ni family was filled with cheers. Ni who glanced at Hellion Vivian proudly. You said that my father would be invaded by resentment, but now you're dumbfounded. It seemed like a long time had passed, but in reality, it was only a dozen seconds. After the formation, Ni Biao opened his eyes abruptly. Then he clenched his fists, starting from his thumb and then his index finger. His eyes were filled with a viciousness that did not belong to an exorcist. Lin Bing Do Zhijie Zhen Lai Qian. Exorcism. Following Ni Biao's hand gestures, the two mahogany swords flew toward Bailey Jiaju fiercely, along with countless sharp edges. No. Zhuge Yun immediately closed his eyes. He did not want to see the outcome of this battle. Just when all the exorcists thought that Beligaju would reveal his true form, a loud bang was heard. As if they had encountered a strong obstacle, the swords stopped 10 centimeters away from Beligaju. As if they were resisting, sparks flew from the friction. Zhuge Yun immediately opened his eyes when he heard the sound. He saw Beligaju standing in the middle. His green robe and long hair were clearly intertwined. The fluttering sound came from his left sleeve when he raised it. Those swords were really blocked by him with just a raise of his hand. Not only that, even the real mahogany swords were trembling from his aura. Creak. Along with the crisp sound, the mahogany swords finally could not take it anymore. Cracks appeared on the scabbard one after another. Baligaju looked at the swords in front of him with a faint smile. His eyes were filled with the unique mockery of a demon. It was also the 9 symbolic mantra, but compared to the effect produced by a stupid woman's recitation, this level of spiritual energy was simply too weak. Bang! Baligaju swung his hand with a smile. The mahogany swords changed their original direction and retreated back to Ni Biao. The counterforce caused Ni Biao to take 2 heavy steps back. As if shocked by the sudden counterattack, Ni who did not manage to retract his smile. Instead, his lips turned pale and he shouted, "Father!" Ni Biao did not expect his return of 10,000 swords to be broken. Not only that, he reached out to touch his long hair that was falling down. His fingernails rubbed his face until it bled. At that moment he realized how close he was to death. If it was not for the magical pill in his body, which increased his speed by more than 2 times, the mahogany swords would have pierced through his head. How could this person be so powerful? Ni Biao could not believe it. As he lowered his head, the black gas in his eyes began to surge. Everyone looked at Baligaju, who made his move. However, he only smiled faintly and played with the remaining mahogany swords. "Looks like you're done with your tricks. Then it's my turn. Hee, you're the one who activated the mechanism in the tunnel, right?" Unlike Hellion Vivian's meticulous thinking, Baligaju was the kind of cleverness that left people with no way out. When they heard the news, all the exorcists were stunned. Even Ni, who widened his eyes. Ni Biao did not expect his actions to be discovered. His first reaction was guilt, but his second reaction was murderous intent. As long as he did not have a chance to speak, everything would be solved. "You're about to die and you still want to frame me?" Ni Biao sneered. He did not know that because of Baligaju, the resentment in his heart had resonated with the magical pill in his body. As a result, his fingertips began to be stained black. Since the return of 10,000 swords could not kill this brat, then he would use the magical pill. Thinking of this, Ni Biao's eyes flashed and he jumped up. Using his spiritual energy as a cover, he turned his palm into a claw and clawed at Baligaju's neck. No one could resist the invasion of the demonic nature. Just turn into a demon. If Ni Biao knew Baligaju's identity, he would never have made such a stupid decision. Perhaps when facing the 9 symbolic words, His Highness would be worried that his aura would leak out. But when facing the demons, he was the king that all the demons in the world had to bow down to. How could he be afraid of the demonic aura? Chapter 776. Baligaju smiled faintly. He was as courteous as a gentleman, but he gave off an indescribable evil vibe. Molten gold leaked out from the corner of his long and deep eyes. Before Ni Biao could get close to him, he straightened the broken sword in his hand. His action was very elegant, but his eyes were filled with hostility. A swoosh was heard. Ni Biao's palm was pierced through just like that. Ah! A painful cry resounded throughout the entire palace. Ni Biao was in so much pain that he could not speak. Bright red blood spurted out from his palm like a fountain. He looked at Baligaju in disbelief. His eyes were shaking. How could this be? Why did this person seem to be immune to the demonic energy? The energy that he released did not affect him at all. What kind of monster was this person? Ni Biao reached out to press on his aching hand. Large beads of cold sweat trickled down his forehead. Faintly, the magic core in his body became even more unstable. "Be quiet." Ni Biao suddenly shouted. Ni, who was so frightened that he wanted to step forward, turned pale. He swallowed his saliva with great difficulty. No one knew who Ni Biao was yelling at. Baligaju smiled as he took out a white handkerchief to wipe his hand. He raised his good-looking eyebrows. "As expected, you haven't had time to digest it." It was different from the indifference and nobility seen during the day. Now even the smile at the corner of his mouth was tinged with a faint evil aura. Throwing away the white handkerchief, Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes. His bony little finger was wearing a little ring. The black gem on the ring was shining with an evil light that matched him extremely well. It was eager to devour something. "Ah!" Ni Biao screamed again. His injured hand began to beat his chest. "I asked you to be quiet. Quiet." How could this be? The demonic core had perfectly integrated into his body, and he had already defeated the demonic nature it produced. Why did it have to come out at this time to mess with him? Biao straightened his neck. The green veins on his neck looked like they were about to burst open. One by one they spread to his lower jaw. Baligaju's smile grew wider and wider. His pupils constricted. Biao fell to the ground, rolling back and forth in pain. The silver spider silk could no longer be held back. It shot out from his palm and pierced through who was standing in front of him. Whose leg was injured, but that was not the most painful thing for him. The most painful thing was that his father had grown tentacles that only poisonous spiders would have. Impossible. This is impossible. Who roared as tears streamed down his face. It shouldn't be like this. That man should be the one to become a monster. Why? Why was it his venerable father? Baligaju couldn't care less about the pain of the Ni family's father and son. This was the situation he wanted. Anyone who had harmed that little thing would have to bear the consequences of their actions. Young master you don't seem to believe what you're seeing. Baligaju was like an understanding gentleman. He reached out and grabbed whose collar, then come closer and take a look. No. I don't want to. Who had never been as scared as he was now. His father, the father he respected the most, was curled up like a spider. Baligaju's eyes were smiling, but his tone was cold. Did I say that I gave you a choice? What are you trying to do? Move me away from here. Liangzi Amu, are both of you blind? Why aren't you helping me? Who screamed. When he turned his head he saw the expressions of the people around him. Their fear was mixed with a strong sense of disgust. All eyes were on his father, who was almost deformed. At that moment who gave up struggling. He stood there in a daze, his eyes filled with pain. Biao lowered his head and looked at his hand. When he saw the huge tentacle he broke down. He had lived a glorious life. Wherever he went he was worshipped and respected. But now he was showing his ugliest side in front of the world. Compared to the physical pain, the most unbearable thing for him was the shocked and disgusted looks. Biao wished that he could bite everyone to death. The huge tentacle began to move, accompanied by the transparent poisonous spider silk. Be careful. Zhuge Yun shouted. He took out his mahogany sword to defend himself. The exorcists were also ready to fight. However, before they could make a move, Biao was unable to crawl forward. This was because one of his tentacles was tightly gripped in Baligaju's hand. That person did not seem to use much strength. He was even wearing a black glove. The corner of his mouth was slightly raised. Hey, where are you going? We agreed to have a friendly match. Don't be a wet blanket. No matter what, Biao was now a half-human, half-spider. His body swelled up and was more than 3 times bigger than before. But he could not break free from this man's control. He had underestimated him. Biao was furious. He wanted to fling Baligaju away and use his other leg to penetrate the man's throat. Biao was still too naive. If he knew how His Highness beat up the poisonous spider he would not have taken it for granted. Although His Highness always beat people up in the same way. For example, right now he was holding the original leg in his palm with one hand and using the other hand to block. He spun Biao's body. Then his slender long leg kicked upwards. Crack. Biao's ribs were broken. Crack. With another sound Biao's legs were completely crushed. Without any restraints, Bailey Jiaju was undoubtedly terrifying. Even if he was smiling gracefully at this moment, it couldn't stop his next even more ruthless action. He did not give Biao any chance to catch his breath. When he fell, Bailey Jiaju grabbed his other limbs and said, "Is it fun to press the mechanism? Is it fun to watch the person in front of you disappear? Then I'll make it more comfortable for you." Bam. It was a side kick with the wind. Biao's huge body flew towards the direction of the stone wall. Along with the rumbling sound of the stone breaking, blood gushed out from his throat. Bailey Jiaju pointed at his forehead in distress and said, "That's why I said that spiders are really dirty." Biao felt that his body was no longer his own. Even his tongue was bleeding from being bitten by him. He could not speak normally. Chapter 777. Baligaju did not let him go. He leaped into the air with his feet in the air, grabbed Enai Biao's collar and pushed him forward. Due to the collision, his back was bleeding from the sharp rocks. Under the immense pressure, Enai Biao could not move at all. But Bailey Jiaju only slightly curved the corners of his mouth, and with a voice that only the two of them could hear, he slowly laughed next to his ear like a demon in a dream. Do you know why I can clearly finish you off with one kick, but I still want you to make the first move? Since this is your first time being a demon, I'll tell you. Because of the depletion of spiritual energy, it's easier for me to show my original form just like how you look now. Upon hearing this, Enai Biao's pupils constricted. Woo. You're not a demon. You're a demon. Yes, I'm a demon. Baligaju smiled faintly and exerted force. His cold eyes turned into a golden light. A demon that can easily pull out your demon core. Bang. There was another sound of stone shattering. At that moment, Enai Biao was filled with unprecedented regret. His opponent did it on purpose. He purposely let him jump out to compete and then show his current ugly state. However, even a demon would not be unscathed under the 1,000 ancestral swords. Unless this person's demonic nature was strong enough to suppress the light of Buddha. Is there such a demon in this world? Enai Biao could not help but ask himself as his body fell. However, he did not have the strength to answer as his limbs were paralyzed. In the stone cave, no one would hear their conversation. That meant that no one would discover the man's identity. Enai Biao finally realized that he was done for. He was on the verge of death and was only left with his senses. Zhuge Yun looked at the penetrated stone wall with his mouth wide open. He asked Hellion Vivian in a daze, "Is this still considered a competition? Isn't this a one-sided beating? How did Brother Zhu manage to lift Enai Biao so easily? That's a spider." Hellion Wei Wei's expression was languid as she said slowly, "He once went to the sea and caught a dragon with one hand. He even pulled out the dragon's tendons and carried it back to feed it to his younger brother." She had heard this gossip from Shaoqi. Back then she had always felt that His Highness, who could do this kind of thing with a clear conscience, was not human at all. "Zhuge Yun, tell me secretly, he really isn't human, right?" It was rare for Zhuge Yun to get a definite answer. Hellion Wei Wei looked at the expectant gazes of the exorcists around her and lied calmly, "No, he is indeed a human. However, he has eaten too many dragons, that's why he has such great strength." As they were talking, the noble and elegant His Highness returned leisurely with a half-human, half-spider in his hand. He smiled apologetically, "I'm sorry, I was too good at fighting just now and forgot to kill the demon. I need to leave it to a professional exorcist." As he spoke, he looked at the pale-faced Enai Hu and smiled. "Young Master Enai, now that we've confirmed that your father has become a demon, as the Enai family that maintains the righteous path in the world, Master Enai, I'll leave it to you to place righteousness before family." Enai Biao thought that this was the worst thing that could happen to him. Now this man was asking his son to kill him. Did he want the Enai family to be completely destroyed? "Master Enai, you don't have to thank me. I know that people like you don't want to harm the world, right? Dying in the hands of your closest kin is a relief for you." Baligaju was very considerate when he squatted down and looked into Enai Biao's eyes. Enai Biao was so angry that his internal organs started to hurt. Unfortunately, his tongue was broken and he could not say a word. However, Baligaju laughed at this moment. Or should I say, this kind of thing should be left to Lady Enai, the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on Enai Feng. Unlike Enai Hu, she reacted quickly. Her gentle voice sounded like she was crying, "Father, you've disappointed me. How could you swallow the magical pill? How can you lead the people to defend justice and ward off evil?" Enai Biao, who was smart, immediately understood the other meaning behind her words. His daughter. The daughter that he had raised with all his heart, was she planning to abandon him? Since things have come to this, I can only enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Enai Feng stopped talking and condensed her fingers. Without giving Enai Biao any time to react, she directly locked onto his throat. The pain of being on the verge of death made Enai Biao reach out his hand in despair. However, all he saw was the man's devilish smile. He seemed to be saying, "This is the price you have to pay for hurting the most important thing to me." The person under his feet was no longer breathing. Baligaju gently clapped his hands and said in a clear voice, So this is the reincarnation of the legendary Phoenix girl. He even killed her own father. What an eye-opener. The first one to react was not Feng but Hu. He rushed to Feng and grabbed her arm as he cried, "Why? Sister, why did you do this? That's father." Feng took in a deep breath. Only then did she realize that she had fallen into a trap. A perfect chain of traps set by the other party. No, she could not panic. "Do you think I wanted to do this?" Feng burst into tears and coughed violently. She raised her hand and punched herself repeatedly. Look at what father has become. He was an open-minded person all his life, but he ended up like this because he ate the magical pill by mistake. I did this to set him free. Whose eyes were red. Sister, I've wronged you. Don't be like this. You're the Phoenix girl, you have to do this. I understand. Hearing their cries, the exorcists' hearts were moved. Obviously, they believed Feng's words. Feng lowered her eyes and looked at the people around her. She cried even more weakly. At this moment, Helian Wei, who had been silent all this while, opened her mouth faintly. If you only wanted to free him, you could have directly taken the magical pill from his body and used spiritual aura to heal him. You could have also directly used the demon-slaying Buddhist incantation to eliminate the demonic nature in his body. However, you didn't even hesitate for a moment before you grabbed his throat with one hand and killed him directly, not even leaving him with half a breath of air. Young lady, the person you attacked is your father, not some random passerby. No matter how immature your younger brother is, he still has some humanity in him. As for you, you just want to quickly solve this matter and maintain your reputation as the Phoenix girl. Chapter 778. When Feng heard Helian Vivian's words, her crying suddenly stopped. Even her outstretched fingers became a little stiff, as if she had been wronged to the extreme. Young Master Wei, you were the one who asked me to do it, and now you are the one who is blaming me. Everyone saw that my father had completely transformed into a demon. Only by destroying both him and the demon can we ensure that he will not be devoured by the remaining demon. Even if we remove the demon core from his body, no one can guarantee that his blood will not be infected. My brother really couldn't do it because no one knows better than us siblings how difficult it is to do it. I don't want my brother to bear this pain. I know he can't bear it, so let me bear it. Young Master Wei, you can say that I have no humanity, or that I just want to maintain my reputation. I will accept it. As long as you don't let my brother suffer, you can say whatever you want. Miss Elderly couldn't bear to see her coughing until she was out of breath. He turned his head and said to Helian Vivian, "Little brother Wei, you have gone too far. The Phoenix girl has always been merciful, and she is definitely not like what you see on the surface. In fact, this is all because of a misunderstanding. Although Miss did it just like what she said, she feels worse than anyone else." When the exorcists heard Elderly's words, they looked at the siblings who were hugging each other and Biao who was lying dead on the ground. They couldn't imagine that such a good family would end up in such a mess. They felt pity for them. Let's just forget about this. After all, it was a close call. Someone advised, thinking that this matter should end here. Unexpectedly, Helian Vivian spoke calmly. If you can't remove the demon core, you can still use the demon-killing Buddhist incantation. This Buddhist incantation is not like removing the demon core. Once it is used, it is enough to eliminate all the demons in a human's body, right? Or is it that? Speaking to this point, Wei Wei paused for a moment. A trace of a smile, yet not a smile, flashed through her beautiful eyes. You simply can't use the demon-killing Buddhist incantation? A Phoenix girl who can't use the demon-killing Buddhist incantation, isn't she fake? This sentence was practically a blatant provocation. Helian Vivian had said from the beginning that she didn't have time to waste with them. Everyone, including Hu, was stunned by Helian Vivian's last question. His first reaction was to rush over and yell at her. However, he was not the slightest bit closer to that person. This was because Beligaju had already tidied up his clothes and stood beside Helian Vivian. At that moment, Hu felt like he was looking at two people who worked together seamlessly. Although one was handsome and cold while the other was lazy and gentle, there was an irresistible glint in their eyes. His reaction was completely different from before. Feng's entire body froze. Her eyes and arms drooped down as if something was about to emerge from her eyes. Old Li was the one who didn't believe it the most. Little brother Wei, do you know what you are saying? How can the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl be questioned? Oldly, Hellion Vivian's voice became clear and cold. I know you have a different gratitude towards the Phoenix Girl because she appeared in your dreams before. However, have you ever thought that blind worship can sometimes harm you and those who are influenced by your intuition? If Miss Anai is really the Phoenix Girl, then everyone will be happy. But what if she isn't? Have you ever thought about the consequences? Someone is pretending to be your benefactor and using the name of the Phoenix Girl to do whatever she wants. If the real Phoenix Girl finds out about this, how do you think she will feel? Perhaps it was because of the righteous aura of the person in front of him, or maybe it was because the way she looked at him was too oppressive. At that moment, Oldly was filled with uncertainty. Yes, what if the other party was fake? Wouldn't that be using the name of the Phoenix Girl to control them? The main thing was just like what the other party had said. If the benefactor wasn't Miss Anai, then would the real benefactor feel cold and helpless towards his current actions? Because he had been protecting Anai Feng all this while. However, he really couldn't give up his persistence and belief for so many years. What evidence do you have to prove that Miss Anai isn't the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl? Elderly hesitated for a while before asking. The Buddhist exorcism incantation doesn't count. Lady Ni's body is very weak now. If she were to use it once, she would need at least half a year to recover. I can't allow anyone to take this risk. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. This was the most direct method, but since Oldly had rejected it, she could only take another approach. I do have evidence, but we need to investigate carefully. Hellion Vivian's voice was calm as if she was telling a story. First, I'll tell everyone a secret about the Ni family. 7 years ago, there was a secret in the backyard of the Ni family. It was done by Master Ni. I'm sure young Master Ni has seen it. No, I haven't seen it. I've never seen it before. Ni who shouted and covered his head. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. It doesn't seem like you haven't seen it before. However, it's okay if young Master Ni doesn't admit it, because there's another person here who has seen it before, and that's young Master Yun. Zhuge Yun nodded and repeated the words that he had told Hellion Wei seriously. At that time, Master Ni used the excuse that there was a monster in there and didn't allow anyone to go near it. He also didn't allow young Master Yun to tell anyone. Hellion Vivian's voice was calm. In fact, I think everyone should understand the reason why he didn't allow anyone to go near it. As soon as Hellion Vivian finished speaking, an exorcist immediately exclaimed and murmured in disbelief. He's using a corpse to raise a corpse, and I Biao wants to use a corpse to raise a corpse. As soon as the words using a corpse to raise a corpse were uttered, it immediately caused an uproar in the surroundings. However, Hellion Wei turned a blind eye to this and continued, "That's right, it's using a corpse to raise a corpse." It was recorded in the forbidden exorcism spell that in order to activate this spell, the surroundings must be filled with corpse aura. Of course, what I want to say is not only that, but also that young Lady Ni's room was right next to these corpses. What's wrong with that? And I who shouted angrily, since it's my father's doing, what does it have to do with my sister? My sister is pitiful enough. She's been in poor health ever since she was young because she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Do you have to blame all my father's mistakes on her? Hellion Vivian glanced at him and continued his words calmly. Since your sister is in poor health, she should be placed somewhere else instead of staying so close to these corpses, unless the person your father wants to use to raise a corpse is your sister. Chapter 779. Hellion Vivian's words were like a bomb that was suddenly dropped. Everyone felt as if their blood had frozen. They didn't even dare to look at the Ni family now. Their heads were all swollen. Only Ni who was more clear-headed than ever. What nonsense are you talking about? That's impossible. Ni whose legs could not move. He bared his teeth at Hellion Vivian and roared. There was a strong fear in the depths of his heart. This fear made him unwilling to admit the truth even though he knew who it was. Hellion Vivian looked at him with clear eyes. Young Master Ni, you must know better than anyone how the Ni family survived that year. You ran to the Zhuge family to complain to your friends that your sister was about to die. You even prepared a shroud and a coffin for her, didn't you? However, the next day Ni Feng inexplicably recovered. No one knew how she recovered. In fact, she didn't recover. Instead, she came back to life and used enough corpse aura to prolong her life. Wei. And I who pointed at her and gritted his teeth, you're talking nonsense. Do you believe that I'll show you the power of our Ni family right now? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Young Master, you have such a big reaction every time. Do you want me to guess that the reason you cried back then was not because your sister was about to die, but because you saw that she was already dead, right? All of a sudden, Ni who froze on the spot as if someone had pressed his acupoints. Because of the memories of his childhood, his face was pale and drained of all color. Ni Feng let out a long sigh. Young Master Wei, you've been talking for a long time. These are all your guesses. You even misled my brother step by step. Do you want everyone to think that I'm not the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl? Back then my body was indeed very weak, but based on little brother Yun's childhood memories of playing hide and seek, young Master Wei said that my father created the corpses so that he could use them to nurture more zombies. In reality, zombies were rampant in the world back then, so my father caught many of them and brought them back to the residence. He was waiting for them to be burned down in a big fire so that no one could enter. The reason why I stayed next to the residence was because my father had instructed me to look after the courtyard and not let anyone enter. I never thought that it would cause little brother Yun to misunderstand. As for why I suddenly became better, it was all because of the spirit chi in my body. Young Master Wei might not know, but the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl is just like the Phoenix. They all need to be reborn, and I was like that back then. After hearing Ni Feng's explanation, Ni who finally calmed down. The others were also pondering the same thing. Miss Ni is right. It was indeed the year when zombies ran rampant in the world. So it's not raising a corpse. Perhaps young Master Yun saw wrongly. After all, he was still young at that time. According to his description, he accidentally broke into the courtyard and did not react when he saw so many zombies. He was frightened and mistook them for a group of corpses. Zhuge Yun really did not want to believe what he had heard. What was clearly an ironclad matter was completely changed after Ni Feng's explanation. His handsome face flushed red. I didn't see wrongly. Zombies wouldn't be so fresh. Little brother Yun, so many years have passed. Can you be sure that you didn't see wrongly? What's more, you said it yourself. It was already late at that time. You were also shocked at that time. When people are scared, cough, especially children, it's very easy for them to have illusions. Coupled with their own imagination, the result might be completely different from the reality. Ni Feng coughed lightly as she spoke. Although her voice was gentle, her words refuted all of the evidence provided by Zhuge Yun. The exorcists looked at each other, each of them deep in thought. Zhuge Yun was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. How can a woman like you reverse right and wrong? Little brother Yun, I've always known that you have a bad opinion of the Ni family. Ni Feng lowered her eyes, her back looked even weaker due to the light cough. But an illusion is an illusion, it can't be used as evidence. Zhuge Yun still wanted to say something but was stopped by Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian looked at him and smiled. Young Master Yun, let me teach you something to deal with this kind of acting. Don't be anxious in the future. Just think carefully about her words and see if there are any contradictions. Then, Hellion Vivian slowly curled her lips, full of evil. You'll be able to hit the nail on the head. Zhuge Yun did not understand. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. Let me do it, I'm your idol after all. I only worship the real Phoenix girl. Zhuge Yun muttered softly. Although I really want to be you now, I still worship the real Phoenix girl the most. Hellion Vivian listened to him and smiled. She did not say anything more to Zhuge Yun. On the other hand, the bigger fetus in Hellion Vivian's stomach proudly lifted its chin and said in a cool and soft voice, How slow is this young exorcist's reaction? Mother has already said it herself, he still can't guess that Mother is the Phoenix girl he worships. Humans are really stupid. Of course they can't be compared to brother. The smaller fetus responded weakly, even its eyes were smiling. The bigger fetus was very pleased with the smaller fetus's words. It lowered its head and kissed the smaller fetus, moving away a little so that the smaller fetus could perceive the situation outside. At this moment, Hellion Vivian looked directly at Ni Feng, who was trying to pretend to be calm. She said again, Miss Ni, according to what you said, you were seriously ill at that time. Then I'd like to ask you, how could a person who was seriously ill and bedridden be assigned to guard the zombies? That's right, how could a person who could not even get out of bed be able to deal with zombies? It was simple. All of a sudden, all of Ni Feng's words became shaky and unsteady. The exorcists were not stupid, some of them understood immediately. They looked at Ni Feng suspiciously from all directions. Ni Feng's hands were tightly clenched into a ball, her teeth were almost bleeding. She did not expect that just one sentence would be used against her. Normally, people would not analyze every word to see if there were any contradictions in her words. Where did this person with the surname Wei come from? Of course, Ni Feng did not know what kind of training the person standing in front of her received in the 21st century and how meticulous her thoughts were. She did not get her lawyer's license for nothing. Hellion Vivian looked at her and slowly added the most fatal blow. Since Miss Ni mentioned the spiritual aura in your body, then we should study it carefully and see if it is real spiritual aura. Chapter 780. Upon hearing this, Ni Feng's entire body trembled and her back trembled. Ni who also raised his head, his eyes shaking. What do you mean by that? Are you saying that the aura in my sister's body isn't spiritual energy? Young Master Ni is quite smart at times, Hellion Vivian said as she took out the candle from Zhuge Yun's body. Ni who could hear the sarcasm in her words and sneered. You've really put in a lot of effort just to frame my sister. You even made up a lie that it's not spiritual energy. Everyone here can feel the spiritual energy in my sister's body. Brother Wei, don't say that it's not there just because you're not talented enough to feel it, okay? Miss Ni does have an aura in her body. Hellion Vivian raised her head and looked at Ni who. However, the aura in her body isn't spiritual energy, it's corpse aura. Since Elderly said that Miss Ni's body is weak and we can't risk letting her use the demon-killing Buddhist incantation, let's use a simpler method to test it. As she said this, Hellion Vivian smiled at Elderly. Elderly is most familiar with this method. Those who follow the rules would light a candle and place it in the southeast corner before opening the coffin. Then they would begin to loot the coffin. If the candle goes out, they would have to put the coffin back in its original place, respectfully kowtow 3 times and quickly leave empty-handed. That's why there's the saying that the lantern should not go out even when the rooster crows. The reason why the candle goes out is because the corpse aura emitted by the corpse is too strong. If it continues, it will be dangerous. If it's spiritual energy or life energy, it won't affect the candle at all. Now the candle with the yellow talisman has the same effect on Miss Ni's aura. As Hellion Vivian said this, she took out a yellow talisman from one of the exorcists and wrapped it around the candle. Then she lit it up and handed it to Ni Feng with a smile. Miss Ni, how is it? Do you want to bet on whether the candle will go out or stay lit after you bring it over? Ni Feng did not reach out to take the candle. Instead she stared at Hellion Vivian with gloomy eyes. The expression on her face changed little by little, and even her breathing became heavier. The uncomfortable muffled sound was like the sound of a corpse lying in a coffin, pressing down on everyone's heart. You're really... Elderly, who was the closest to Ni Feng, trembled when he heard the voice. His lips were extremely pale as he swallowed the words, a corpse. I really didn't expect to be discovered. Ni Feng lowered her head and laughed. There was a hint of dullness in her soft voice, revealing an indescribable sense of eeriness. But even if we're discovered, it's not a big deal because it's all too late, huh? All the disciples of the Ni family covered their ears with their hands. They did not know why, but they felt that the strange sound was coming from their bodies. Black gas began to spread from the corners of their eyes, eroding their entire eyeballs. When they looked up again, some of the exorcists seemed to have changed their appearance. Their eyes were hollow and half of their faces were bulging with veins, as if they were congested with blood. What's going on? Zhuge Yun roared. He was the first to pull out the peachwood sword. The remaining 6 or 7 people followed him, wanting to point their scabbards at the mutated exorcists. However, they were too difficult to deal with. Not only were they agile, but their movements were also familiar. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws at some of the exorcists. They could no longer be called humans. They were a bit like monkeys, baring their fangs and biting the shoulders of the other exorcists. One of them wanted to attack Hellion Vivian, but before he could get close to her, he was thrown 2 meters away by a figure that suddenly appeared in front of him. His Highness moved quickly like a black shadow. With Hellion Vivian as the starting point, he rapidly changed his position. Before anyone could see clearly how he kicked the first monkey away, he had already stepped on the face of the third monkey with his long legs. His figure was graceful, smooth, and beautiful. The unmutated exorcists who were standing at the side were stunned. Hellion Vivian did not look at the monkeys. Instead, she focused her attention on an iPhone. Her long and narrow eyes suddenly narrowed. She raised her left arm abruptly with a silver handgun in her hand. With a distance of 7 meters, she aimed at Ni Feng's head without any deviation. Bang! If it was not for a white-robed figure blocking her, her shot would have blown Ni Feng's head off. "Young master!" Ni Feng cried out involuntarily when she saw the blood spurting out. The figure did not hesitate at all. He held her with his injured hand and looked at Hellion Vivian with his ink-black eyes. With a tap of his heel, he disappeared into the endless darkness. Then a dense crowd of exorcists blocked the entrance of the cave. Each of them bared their fangs and brandished their claws like man-eating zombies. Hellion Vivian did not hesitate. She fired 5 out of the 6 bullets. Except for the first shot, every shot hit the monkeys in the head. A headshot. A row of them fell down uniformly. The last shot hit 3 of them in a row. When blood splashed out, the exorcists were completely dumbfounded. "That's it? That's it? What's that in Brother Wei's hand?" Bang, bang, bang. It can kill all the enemies with just a few bangs. Hellion Vivian did not respond to their gazes. She reached out and pulled the zombies blocking the entrance away. She looked at the endless darkness and narrowed her eyes. "That's not the direction of the Saraira. One of them is injured and the other is a corpse. Without the protection of the spiritual aura of a real exorcist, they can't get close to the main coffin. If they can't get close to the main coffin, they can't get the Saraira." Elderly wiped the blood off his face and said in fear, "That direction just now, don't tell me they want to get that thing." Hellion Vivian looked at him and put away the silver spear in her hand. Her voice was indifferent. "What's that thing? Elderly, you seem to have hidden a lot of things from us. Now that things have come to this, it's time to let everyone know how many secrets there are in this tomb competition." "It's not that I want to hide it from you." Elderly smiled bitterly. "I didn't expect that the Ni family would dare to lie about the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, so I told them everything about the tomb. In this tomb, other than the Saraira, there's another thing that can resurrect the dead. But it's different from the Saraira. Once that thing is used, it will awaken all the sleeping demons in the tomb. At that time, we might all die in the ancient tomb." That you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.